towards his fantasy. He used to believe in something. What happened? Mills for liberty. Gnostic sex cult, building his own world. A Gnostic sex cult, unhinged from reality. He's totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly? It's not a Gnostic sex cult, James. No, it's not. Stop lying to your audience. No, it's not. It's not Gnostic, James. Mary Nardini tells us queer liberation means the annihilation of capitalism. Catch up, James. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. Whoa. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's capitalism. To pocket all that money from the mills for liberty. The left hates capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory stabilizes normativity. The gender binary and the nuclear family. But James blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him, creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. Is to believe in something. What happens for liberty? Gnostic sex cult, building its own world. The Gnostic sex cult, unhinged from reality. He's totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly?
Well, good evening, fellow Gnostic sex cultists. We're joined by BigTech from the Shadow Realm tonight. Why are you in the Shadow Realm?
That's just what you're calling it.
Well, what else? You look like a shadow person, though. What is it? What is this? It's a vibe.
You ever seen a white shadow?
I mean, you're mostly black, though.
If I was all black, you wouldn't be able to see me.
But you're like an inverted person right now.
You're an inverted person.
I mean, maybe, but
So
I don't look.
Maybe go look in the mirror.
Okay, what does that mean?
Why are you inverted?
I mean, because I guess I want to be.
Well, there you go.
So you want to be a shadow person too?
Problem?
I mean, I guess you can do what you want, but okay, fine. I guess.
What's with this attitude I'm getting?
I don't think I'm getting it. I don't think I'm giving it attitude. I'm just like it's just a vibe, okay? This is a whole vibe. It's a look, and I'm just curious about what led you to the Shadow Realm. It's kind of like an interesting concept, though, isn't it? It's like and I'm not trying to shit on you or anything. I'm just saying, like, it's kind of an interesting idea to play online with being your shadow self in some respects.
Right.
Is that what you're doing? Okay. Well, we're here to watch a movie of sorts. What are we watching?
Okay, so we're going to watch Century of the Self, Part 1, which is titled Happiness Machines.
Is your mic like way softer than mine? I think it might be.
I don't know. It's up to you.
It might be. I think it might be.
Do I sound low on your end?
I think we sound more. I just lowered mine, so I think we sound more even to me now.
There's a thing in StreamYard that does automatic mic
Yeah,
volume control. Maybe I should turn that off.
that shit doesn't work. I found.
All right, I'm turning that off.
All right.
I can boost mine through
Oh.
StreamYard too.
Yeah, you just got louder.
Did it just get better or worse?
I think better.
Check. You want it there? A little more, a little less?
That's fine, I
1,
think.
2, 3.
That's fine. I just want us to be even, and I feel like I sounded louder than you. I don't want to be shouting or anything. I don't want to give you the impression I'm mad just because you're in the shadow realm. So okay, so we're watching.
So we gotta ask your chat though. On my end, we're level because I'm controlling your levels through my soundboard. But everybody on YouTube, let us know how are we balanced?
Sarah says thumbs up.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we trust Sarah?
I mean, well, other people will tell us. Yeah. Are you Ghost in the Machine?
Yes.
Okay. He doesn't want to talk about it, Human Centipede. All right. Okay, so we're watching Century of the Self. What do you like? 'Cause I feel like I've heard about this series, but I don't think I ever actually watched it. So what do you like about this? What are we learning from this?
This series, it lays out the story of how we changed through a intentional application of psychological warfare. And that's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is that there were some fellas, some Jewish individuals, just so happens, just happens to be guys, these Jewish Germans who were in a certain school of psychology, Freud, Lippmann, Bernays, and others. They discovered that there is a way of, through their development of understanding of the subconscious mind, they developed ways of subliminally and on a massive scale propagandizing us and even shifting our motivations, like on a deep, deep fundamental level, on a massive scale. And this is the story of how that happened. And it all happened in the early part of the last century. These guys were all born in the late 1800s. They were coming of age into professionalism in the early 1900s, 19-teens, 1920s. And they all colluded. They all were reading each other's work, working together, theorizing, writing books, and then getting into government with massive propaganda campaigns. And their work became extremely influential. And long story short, in the first part of the series, it's a 4-part series. The first part's going to tell us how we went from focusing on the things that we need to survive, which is pretty much all of human history. That's what it was. It was like the things we do are dictated by what we need. And they changed us into people who we do things based on what we desire. So they switched our motivation from need to desire. And they turned us into, from producers into consumers. Consumerism was born, and it was intentional. It was created as a concept, and then it was fed to us as an option, and we were persuaded into a whole new mind frame of how we see ourselves and how we operate in society. And the reason for doing that was to gain a certain type of traction on how we all behave, so that in a system like like ours of democracy, it turns out that you can create the illusion that the people are in control of the government and that the government works for the people and that the people have a choice. But if you secretly are the one behind the scenes in a way, in an unseen, unheard, invisible way, or if you are inserting into the people's minds like a drive to desire a certain thing or a thought about a certain thing or to think a certain way, you're actually driving their choices. So if you can influence the way people choose things and then let their choices guide the society, you are guiding the society because you are guiding what they think that they are themselves choosing. But we don't realize that idea and that desire to choose this or that was put there by somebody else who has a deep understanding of human psychology and mass manipulation, mind control. It's amazing. It's amazing what they learned and what they figured out how to do. And so this series is going to basically follow the people who developed that process and how the story unfolded that they were able to pull it off.
So I vaguely remember studying Edward Bernays in college, and I never really studied Freud all that much because I was much more Jungian. But I know the socialists like Freud. But the things that I remember about Edward Bernays from what I had to read in college was that, like, he was like the godfather of PR, and he is responsible for the fact that we have built-in bookcases in homes because, like, the book lobby wanted to sell more books, and so he lobbied the home builders to build in built-in bookcases in houses, because if people have built-in bookcases, then they're going to have to fill them with something, and they ended up selling more books. And he's also responsible for the fact that, like, steak and eggs is considered to be a breakfast because it wasn't before his PR campaign. And that's basically all I remember from college about him. So this should be interesting.
Those details are close enough to call them accurate, and yeah, but it goes way deeper. He literally wrote the book. The book, one of his best-selling books, is called Propaganda. Like, he is the godfather of American propaganda, and we call him the godfather, but really, he took it from these two other guys. His uncle was Sigmund Freud.
Mm-hmm.
So Edward Bernays, his uncle was Sigmund Freud. Learned from his uncle, and also he stole from Walter Lippmann, another New York Jew, came from a Jewish German immigrant family. But I will mention that they're Jewish only because I think, in my personal view of things, it was from these people arose these ideas for a reason. They are a very specific little niche group of people who think a little different than everybody else, and they're separate from us all. And they have a very keen interest in learning to control the minds of the people around them, because they're an extreme small minority and an underdog. And their survival is very, very important to them. So they've learned how to control all of us who are around them. So from this little group, so if I point out that this person, if we look at their ancestry, it's not to demonize them, but it is to identify how it wasn't just a bunch of clever, it just happened that humans figured this out. It was a very small niche group of people who think a certain way started doing this to us.
But Human Centipede says this is an elaborate plot by you to convince me of something. Is this a plot?
An elaborate juice pill plot on Carlin by BigTech. Honestly, this wasn't even my idea. This film is many years old. It's on YouTube. It's been seen 100 bajillion times. And by the way, those who are worried about it, yeah, it is a little long. It's 4 parts. I think it's about 3.5 hours in total. We're only going to watch the first part.
Yeah, we're going to do this in parts.
55 minutes.
All right.
It'll take us a couple hours to watch it right here.
Is there anything
This wasn't
else?
my idea. Somebody pitched this to us, and we thought, hey, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was his manager.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have anything else you want to say before we get started?
Are you going to play it?
Yeah, I'll
You're
play
gonna
it.
Control it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope. Let's get right into it.
All right. Let's do it. Come on.
He hated it. Said he wanted this stuff.
100 years ago, a new theory about human nature was put forward by Sigmund Freud. He had discovered, he said, primitive sexual and aggressive forces hidden deep inside the minds of all human beings. Forces which, if not controlled, led individuals and societies to chaos and destruction. This series is about how those in power have used Freud's theories to try and control the dangerous crowd in an age of mass democracy. At the heart of the story is not just Sigmund Freud, but other members of the Freud family. When will call. This episode is about Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays. Bernays is almost completely unknown today, but his influence on the 20th century was nearly as great as his uncle's.
Thievery afoot. Maybe.
You stole this idea from me? Who's he talking to?
I don't know. An accusation has been made.
Because Bernays was the first person to take Freud's ideas about human beings and use them to manipulate the masses. Blue heaven. He showed American corporations for the first time how they could make people want things they didn't need by linking mass-produced goods to their unconscious desires. Out of this would come a new political idea of how to control the masses. By satisfying people's inner selfish desires, one made them happy and thus docile. It was the start of the all-consuming self, which has come to dominate our world today. Freud's ideas about how the human mind works have now become an accepted part of society, as have psychoanalysts. Every year, the psychotherapist ball is held in a grand palace in Vienna.
This is the psychotherapy ball. Psychotherapists come, some advanced patients come, or former patients come, and many other people, friends, but also people from the Viennese society who like to go to a nice, elegant, comfortable ball.
But it was not always so. 100 years ago, Freud's idea
Do you think there's something about psychoanalysis that is like particularly insidious? Just because it seems to show up in a lot of situations involving crazy people.
Well, my opinion on psychoanalysis is that it is a way of hijacking a certain part of the human experience and exploiting it, usually.
What do you
I
mean?
don't think it's sort of like there's an agenda. There's an agenda at play there. I don't know if I could. What else can I say about it? But what do you think? What do you think about psychoanalysis?
I just I mean, the only frame of reference I really have for it now, like I said, I never really studied it because I was always more into like Jungian stuff. But the only frame of reference I have now for it is that there are a metric ton of like socialists and queer psychoanalysts, and they all have these like queer like family therapy psychoanalysis practices where they're treating non-binary 3-year-olds, and they're doing like polyamorous couples, and they do counseling sessions around like BDSM, and those and all of this is taking place within the same like therapy unit, and oftentimes by the same people. And so it's just like this weird thing that we have like this massive list of these queer psychotherapists that are all using this stuff, and we don't know what the attraction is of like far left queer Marxists to Freud and psychoanalysis.
See, I'm asking me to turn my volume up again. I'm going to boost it a little bit more. Let me know. All right, I've given it a boost. Let me know if it still needs to go up more. I can do it. I've got another.
It definitely sounds
25%.
louder now.
Yeah, I think so. For psychoanalysis, like, look, it's sort of, they're saying it's better. Okay, good. I don't know. I'm not really a pro on it, but all I know is that where it comes from is, again, it's sort of like with the it comes from Freud. He doesn't represent all Jews, but there are things that come from the Jewish community that have, to me, the same flavor. It's like you can like, you've ever walked by a Chinese food restaurant and it smells like Chinese food. It doesn't smell like a burger joint. It smells like Chinese food. If you go to a taco shop, it smells like a taco shop. And
If you go to a bagel shop, it smells like a bagel shop.
right. So there's a certain aroma. There's a certain type of vibe. There's a certain flavor of essence to the thing that the Jewish thing has. There's a through line that goes right up through Freud too, but it's in their religion, it's in their social practices, it's in their culture, it's even in their language. There's something about it that's just very Jewish. Fine. But what we get from a Jewish psychologist, you get psychotherapy. At the end of it, you get this thing where it's really getting into the anima, or the he calls it the ego and id, where it's just getting into like, what is the fundamental part of the person? Where does it come from? And it gets right down to the mother issue usually, which is a very Jewish way to do it, by the way. It's like there's something about the maternal aspect of in Judaism, like it's, in my view, Judaism itself is a female strategy. It's a female-centric strategy on the world. It's there's a lot to that. I don't need to expound a lot, but it's usually the underdog strategy, and it's through seduction, manipulation, gossip, pitching one strong thing against another strong thing to make them both weaker, so that you can then your part becomes telling a story that soothes, or telling a story that disintegrates, or it's a lot of stories, a lot of talking, a lot of kind of gathering, a lot of behind the scenes. It's not upfront. It's not the masculine, it's not the male, the typically male. It's not the penetrative type of force that Jews use. Typically, it's the receptive, the female side. It's the recessive force, which is still, but it's very, very effective. And that's just how some people would say that they rule the world or whatever. Well, how would they do that with such small numbers? Are they just genius, smarter than everybody else? Well, it turns out that not really. And they don't have more geniuses than everybody else does. Like there's a larger number of geniuses in every other group, just because their group is so much bigger. So, but the way they do it is they have a different strategy than almost everybody else uses. And there's not really a good counter to it. There's really not. It's almost like asking a man to figure out women. It's like really difficult. Most men just can't figure women out. They're sort of an enigma. Like, why are women the way they are? It's foreign. It's like an alien to a man. So in the same way, the way that the Jewish psychology is, the Jewish culture, or the Jewish religion, or the Jewish angle, the Jewish power, it's like an alien power to most nations, most groups of people, most cultures. In the same way, I think Freud is like that. His psychology, which became psychoanalysis, it's really like it's an alien method, and it gets into our minds, and it reveals a part of ourselves that we're not really used to. And the dangerous part is that it becomes sort of like a way that a person can hack into your life. You can hack into, it's like a hack. You can hack into somebody's psychology, and you can sort of insert things while you're picking around in there. What you can actually do is sort of like emphasize this or that in a person, and you can get them all twisted up. And I think it's why, like what your question was, that you end up with a lot of the queerists and the socialists, the subversive revolutionarists, the communists, like these types. They find their way into that. And the question is like, is it a chicken or the egg? Does psychoanalysis turn them queer, or does their queerness make them want to go into psychoanalysis? What makes somebody want to choose to go have Chinese food? Like, I don't know. It's just like, it's something about you. But I don't know. That's kind of like my general thoughts about it. And that's pretty much it. I'm not really a pro, though. I'll say
All
that.
right. Fair enough. That was good enough for now.
Were hated by Viennese society. At that time, Vienna was the center of a vast empire ruling Central Europe. And to the powerful nobility of the Habsburg court, Freud's ideas were not only embarrassing, but the very idea of examining and analyzing one's inner feelings was a threat to their absolute control.
You see, at that time, these people had the power. And of course, you just were not allowed to show your bloody feelings. I mean, you just couldn't. You couldn't, if you were unhappy. Can you imagine? For instance, you sit somewhere in the country in a castle, you are deeply unhappy, you are a woman. You couldn't go to your maid and cry on her shoulders, or you couldn't go into the village and complain, about your feelings. I mean, you couldn't, it was like selling yourself to somebody. You just couldn't, because they had to respect you. Now, of course, Freud,
Right.
you see, put that thought very much into question, because you see, to examine yourself, you would have to to put a lot of other things into question, your society, everything what surrounds you. And that wasn't a good thing at that time.
Why not?
Because your self-created empire, to a certain extent, would have fallen into bits much earlier already.
But what frightened the
Would you
rulers
pause
of
right
the
there?
empire
I think
even
that's
more
really
Yeah.
interesting.
was Freud's idea that hidden in
Go ahead.
She calls it your self-created empire would fall into bits. And it's, I think to break that a little bit open or unpack that, it's like we used to have a high trust honor society. That's how the world worked. And your name or your word meant like everything. All of your transactions and your social status was built on your name and your word and the worth of your word. And that's the way that the world worked. And that's why, like in a way, like that's how I would identify. That's why you couldn't go around and blab about your feelings. Oh, I'm feeling off today. Oh, I feel crazy right now. Oh, what's wrong with me, right? The way that they want you to do on the psychologist's or the psychiatrist's couch or whatever. You know, airing out grievances or even insecurities or whatever like that. You couldn't do that because there was a reliance on keeping a certain type of public front, you know? And other cultures have it too, like in the Asiatic culture, they would call it like saving face or whatever like that. It's not just about a legacy of honor, but you actually need to, you show up with regard to other people and your duty to be strong in the world because everybody kind of depends on that. So the world depended on the strength of the individuals. And if you showed yourself to be weak, you would lose social standing, as you really should, though, in order for the world to be able to kind of like carry on in trust and in honor with each other. We can't have a bunch of weirdos being accepted as, oh, they're just weird. Oh, they're just disturbed, you know?
But I mean, wouldn't you say that? I mean, well, I guess I won't put words in your mouth, but like, I guess my perspective on that is, isn't that a little bit unrealistic? I mean, doesn't that contribute to? Okay, so what I was thinking about when you were saying that was I was thinking about how there are these influencers on the internet that always present like this perfect image and they have this perfect brand and they never go off narrative and all this stuff and to look at them, it's like, okay, they're kind of doing the thing that, you know, they should be doing. They're not engaging in drama, they're not engaging in bullshit or any of that, but it's also just like most of it's fake and inauthentic. So is it healthy to repress stuff like that?
What influencers are you talking about?
Well, I'm just saying, like, there's like, I think a lot of people, like, I'm just saying in general, there are people that plan out their entire fucking brands and all this stuff because they want to present that public image because they think that the image is like the most important thing. I'm not necessarily saying that we should be crying our feelings all day, every day, but I don't know. I struggle with this idea of putting so much credence on what other people think of you and how other people judge your actions.
Yeah, well, like the way we do it now, it's usually that you're putting on a front that says, I'm a person you want to be like. And that's what the influencer is. I'm influencing you to be this or that way and respect me and want to be me, want to have what I have, so that you'll what? You'll click on my video, you'll buy my product, whatever. Like we've gone through a full cycle of becoming these selfish individuals. Whereas before, the reason for it was, I want to know that if I shake your hand and do a deal with you, you're going to carry through with your word. And so if you have a reputation for being a loosey-goosey, psychologically disturbed person, nobody's going to do deals with you. Nobody's going to transact with you. Nobody's going to enter into a contract with you. Nobody's going to like even maybe let you live in their village or, you know, whatever. We need to be able to trust everybody so that we can survive and so that we can produce and do well, so that we can succeed, so that we can come up, so that we can increase, so that we can endure. It was because we needed it. We needed to have trust with each other. So we needed to act in a certain way in accordance with social standards. But we've thrown that out completely. So now what we have is just a pure front in the modern time, it's like I'm somebody who's doing great and you wish you could be like me. And so you'll buy my product, you'll click my video or whatever. You'll idolize me.
I mean, fair enough, but I guess who gets to decide what the social standards are?
Well, it used to be that essentially, in a way of saying it, nature would, somebody who's dependable does better than somebody who's not. Somebody who's strong does better than somebody who's weak. Somebody who is able to be trusted by others gets cooperation with others, and he succeeds and rises up. But now we're almost in the opposite way. Whoever's the most crazy, whoever's the most flamboyant, the most sagacious in their Weasley deeds, you know what I mean? Anybody who's willing to transgress the most is idolized.
But this is actually my point, though, because it's like, it's not as though social standards don't exist. It's just that the wrong people have decided the social standard.
And that's what this film is about. Those people changed the social standard in our land. The wrong people. This is about them.
All right.
Inside all human beings were dangerous instinctual drives. Freud had devised a method he called psychoanalysis. By analyzing dreams and free association, he had unearthed, he said, powerful sexual and aggressive forces, which were the remnants of our animal past. Feelings we repressed because they were too dangerous.
Freud
Gnostic sex cult
a
feelings.
method for exploring a hidden part of the mind, which we nowadays call the unconscious, which a part that is totally unknown to our consciousness. That there exists a barrier in all our minds which prevents these hidden and unwelcome impulses of the unconscious from emerging. Good night.
In 1914, the Austro-Hungarian Empire led Europe into war. As the horror mounted, Freud saw it as terrible evidence of the truth of his findings. The saddest thing, he wrote, is that this is exactly the way we should have expected people to behave from our knowledge of psychoanalysis. Governments had unleashed the primitive forces in human beings, and no one seemed to know how to stop them. At that time, Freud's young nephew, Edward Bernays, was working as a press agent in America. His main client was the world-famous opera singer Caruso, who was touring the United States. Bernays' parents had emigrated to America 20 years before, but he kept in touch with his uncle and joined him for holidays in the Alps. But Bernays was now about to return to Europe for a very different reason. On the night that Caruso opened in Toledo, Ohio, America announced it was entering the war against Germany and Austria. As a part of the war effort, the US government set up a Committee on Public Information, and Bernays was employed to promote America's war aims in the press. The president, Woodrow Wilson, had announced that the United States would fight not to restore the old empires, but to bring democracy to all of Europe. And Bernays proved extremely skillful in promoting this idea, both at home and abroad. And at the end of the war, he was asked to accompany the president to the Paris Peace Conference.
Then, to my surprise, they asked me to go with Woodrow Wilson to the peace conference. And at the age of maybe 26, I was in Paris for the entire time of the peace conference that was held in the suburb of Paris. And we worked to make the world safe for democracy. That was a big slogan.
What does he mean, safe for democracy?
Yeah, good question. What does he mean by that? Safe for democracy. Well, it really means, like, at the end of the day, it means we need to destroy national identity. That's kind of essentially it. We can't have strong leadership. We need to destroy the patriarchy in a way. We have to make everybody capitalist.
So capitalism?
Yeah. No, it's not, but not exactly.
Well, the patriarchy is capitalism.
Well, I know that's your way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a way of saying it, but not really. No, but capitalism is banks, not patriarchy. Patriarchy is fathers. Capital is bankers.
Well, capitalism is private property ownership, so that can mean a lot of things. So banks would be included in that. Money would be included in that. Any property.
I don't, Carlin, I get what you're doing, but I don't go along with your commie gobbledygook. Okay, that's what commies call capitalism. I'm not a communist, so I don't.
But it's
call
actually,
capitalism
but it's
private property.
but it's not actually separate and distinct from what you're saying. Banks would be included in that. We're talking about the takeover of. I mean, you have argued that this is where communism comes from. So shouldn't we equate?
Well, patriarchy doesn't have anything to do with communism. I mean,
yes, it
patriarchy
does.
Is fascism communism?
Yeah. Well, they no. Well, what the communists say is fascism is free market capitalism.
Free market?
Yeah. Well, I mean, free market capitalism, I've also heard them define it as nationalism, so it would go towards either of you. It aligns perfectly with your definition of it. Anything that is not socialist is considered to be fascist. So anything that's not fully collectivized.
By communists. Communism.
Yeah.
Communist. Yeah, but I don't cuck myself to communist.
I'm just trying to draw
jingoism.
But can't we do both at the same? Can't you have your perspective, and can't we try to equate it back to things?
If there's
a king
who owns, if there's a king who's over everything in the realm, is that capitalism?
Yes. Does the king own all the property?
Yes.
Yes, that's capitalism.
So you call that capitalism?
Well, that would fit under the communist definition of capitalism. Yes, because that's all about private property ownership. Right, it would fit under the
communist definition.
But like
capitalism.
but that's what we're.
I don't use communist definitions.
But I'm suggesting that there might be parallels between what you're saying and what the communists believe, and that's interesting for me to explore.
Right, I know.
Like it's not different.
So you're saying feudalism is capitalism?
I mean, they essentially, yes, because they believe that the farmers were the ones that created capitalism in the first place.
The farmers?
Yeah. So I think that would align with feudalism being the same as capitalism to them.
So if we went back to the Dark Ages, you would call them capitalists?
Well, again, like I'm using their definition, but right. Yeah. As soon as if someone owns a piece of land, a house, like a farm, that's all under their definition of capitalism.
In my opinion, when you start defining things the wrong way, you just lose the power of understanding anything.
But more than half the country probably defines it this way. So some people are defining it this way. But like the point is that it's like, I don't know why why can't we have both definitions? Why can't you say this is what I mean by it? And why can't I say, well, that kind of sounds a little similar to how the left might define it? Because what you're talking about right now is like
we end up in this place where it's like when I say woman, I mean an adult female, and when you say woman, you mean somebody who's wearing a dress.
But we're watching a movie and a series of videos that leads directly into the development of the far left, according to the arguments that you guys make. So wouldn't we want to think about what they're saying in relation to it and the far left? In addition to, we can have the proper definition, that's fine, but can we talk about both? We're just making connections.
Two Ladies Midwest Adventures says, Big Tech, they have stated it so many times over the years, we are trying to explain their perspective, not ours. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I said, if you want to explain it from their perspective, but I don't want to put their words in my mouth.
That's fine. I'm not saying you have to co-sign it. I'm just trying to draw a parallel. That's all.
So here's where am I wrong about this? When they say we want to make this world safe for democracy, what they really mean is spread capitalism. And you're saying that you think that means destroy capitalism.
No. So when they say they want to make the world safe for democracy, what socialists mean by democracy is socialism. So they want socialism, communism. So when they say they want to spread democracy, that to me says socialism.
Are you a socialist?
That under their definition says socialism.
But then
Of
you
course
said
I'm
to
not
me that means
I
socialist. So
miss
are you
well, I
a
miss
socialist?
well, I'm saying from the perspective of
So
someone
to
who
them it means that, but what does it mean to
Yes.
you, who has understanding, versus them who is a radical?
how I
brain.
think about I honestly right now I don't try to think about what I personally believe about these things. I think about what they believe about these things because it helps me to stay in that headspace. So I'm not trying to obfuscate what you're asking. I just don't.
Mhm.
I don't think.
Yeah,
I
I don't
don't
like
think.
to
I
see
don't
the
think.
definitions to
Like,
them. I think once we do
but
that, I think I think you're doing two. My opinion is that you're doing two things at the same time, and one of them's good, and one of them's questionable. One, helping everybody understand their terminology, good. Two, agreeing to use their terminology as though it's accurate, questionable.
I've never said that their terminology is accurate. I've stated many, many times that there are different dictionaries that are at play here. So I've never conceded their
Right.
terms. But in order to do what I do, I need to be able to remain in the headspace of thinking, here's what they mean by this, here's what they mean by that. It just makes things easier. So, I mean, you can say that's bad if you want, but this is like, this is like, have you read Ender's Game?
Mm-mm.
You should read Ender's Game. It's a really effing good book. But in Ender's Game, essentially, it's about this kid that gets like there's basically this battle between a galactic set of bugs and Earth, and this kid is like the last commander that's going to save the world from being demolished by the bugs, whatever. And there's a line in the movie where he says, "When I love my enemy, that's when I can destroy them." And so that's the headspace that I try to be in for like the left, where it's like you're in it all the time, and that's how I just think about these things. And so for
Mhm.
me, one of the beneficial things of watching this with you is to try to draw parallels between themes in here and what the left is doing. So I don't think I'm seeing the definition, but I would struggle to both define what I mean by it just because I haven't thought about that in a really long time, to be honest, because I've been doing this leftist stuff for so long. And so I'm happy for you to have your definition of it and to say, this is my definition and I don't agree with this commie bullshit. I just want to be able to do both.
I think I mean I get what you're saying, but I'm not sure that I agree that you're all the way to the best
Okay.
best strategy.
What should I do then?
I wonder if you've realized that when they say that whiteness means capitalism, that they're actually lying. Have you realized that they're lying when they say that?
Well, of course.
They,
It's all
so
bullshit.
they say whiteness means capitalism.
Yeah.
But they're also lying when they say that. So what does it really mean?
Well, what do you think it really means?
It means whiteness.
What does whiteness mean?
Ethnic homogeneity in the nation.
Okay.
They want to destroy ethnic homogeneity. They don't want there to be a race of people who see themselves as a giant group that are ruling their land for themselves. They want to destroy ethnic homogeneity, and they're doing it under the guise. They think that the tactic of doing that would be to destroy capitalism, who those ethnic people rely on. Those white people need capitalism in order to stay white. So what they do is they attack capitalism to hurt white people. So when you say anti-whiteness means capitalism, but that's a lie. What they really mean is anti-white.
But that would still align with this definition, though, because you're saying they need capitalism, private property for them in order to maintain like a white. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree with this. I'm just like I'm going with where he's going. You're saying that the ownership of private property is required to achieve ethnic homogeneity, and that also makes sense with your definition. So do you see what I'm talking about? Like that what you said is actually not disparate from whiteness meaning capitalism, because it's like the natural conclusion of if you want to have a white ethno state or whatever, that's going to necessitate private property.
It actually, but that's not so. Yes, in a way, that is a way of attacking, but it's a way of just destabilizing the economic fundamentals. Because in my view, an ethnically homogenous group can thrive in almost any economic system. Some are going to be better than others, but if you disrupt whatever the system is that they're using, you'll hurt them. So that's the system that we're under now. And so it's not that we need capitalism to survive. It's that we need cohesiveness. We need fluidity. We need productivity. And that's the way that we're doing it. But even in modern times, saying capitalism as if that's something if that's the thing we need to protect it from the adversary who's trying to sweep the legs out from under us. Yes. But it's not because capitalism is holy or perfect. And in fact, the capitalism that we have now is really not much more than crony bankerism, where really we're just actually economic slaves to a giant billionaire class who pulls this or that lever on interest rates in order to cause us to do all the things that we do. We are literally economic slaves to interest and debt and taxes and all that. So, and that's what capitalism has become anyway. So really, what are we protecting other than a system of how we have become enslaved?
Well, and I don't disagree with any of what you just said, but at the same time, I would also say, how do you create the society that you want without private property ownership?
Well, I mean, we're not going to. I mean, how would it get created?
Yeah.
I mean, even if the government owned everything, which is communism at the end of the day anyway. They say that it's just, we all own everything, but no, it's somebody's.
There would be no
doling it out.
border, but there would
There's
be no
a central
borders.
unified authority.
But there would be no borders anywhere. So what is to prevent the mixing of the different races if there are no borders?
If I accept your, excuse me, no offense, but cockamamie definition of capitalism, which that it means private property.
I'm not going to
that's not what
get mad at
capitalism
you
is.
for being mean to me, so you can keep
So
trying
if I
if you want.
accept this false definition of capitalism, meaning if there's private property, that's capitalism.
Yes.
No.
But I'm asking
when
how
a kid
can
brings his toy over to the birthday party and he says, "This toy is mine. I'll let you use it, but it's still mine." Is he being a capitalist? No, he's just claiming ownership. That's not what capitalism is. Capitalism is an economic system. It's not just private property. That's just like a totally dissolved meaning. That's not what capitalism means.
But that's
just
not
what
what
a
I'm
retarded
asking.
socialist will say.
Okay. I understand, and I agree with you that it's a retarded definition. But
Yeah.
how do you create an ethnically homogenous society without borders? Because
don't.
when you're talking about,
You don't.
well, that's exactly my point, though. Because when you're talking about
Does China have borders?
well, sure, but China also has capitalism. China's not a
Did
fully communist country.
Were the Hans capitalists?
I would think not.
Do they have borders?
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, borders.
Well,
is just
he
say,
was- but-
border is just a place where I say, if you come over here, I'm going to kill you. That's not capitalism. It's territorialism. It's tribalism.
All right. Can I take some super chats?
Yeah. Can I get some super chats?
you gotta get your chat to get. You've got
Go
more
ahead.
people. Actually, no, I do have more people watching than you. Tayton
Nice.
says, "Is psychology in humans actually something that can be fixed, or is most of it hardwired?" That's the question. It's always history repeating itself. What do you think? Is psychology in humans actually something that can be fixed, or is it hardwired?
I think psychology in humans, I don't know, it's very weird, but I think it's something that needs to be protected and cultivated in order to get certain results. And here's the thing about it is that living in a society, in a civilized way, being domesticated human animals is very weird. All right? So it's not actually natural for humans to be domesticated like we are. To live in a system where there's borders, where there's roads, where there's agriculture, where there's an economy of exchange, where there's language. All this stuff is innovation upon innovation upon innovation. We live in an artificial reality. The human world is a mental world that we all have these agreed upon ways of interacting with each other in accordance with certain rules that we've agreed on. And in order for somebody to be able to cope with that, their psychology has to be cultivated in a certain way. And it comes from the way that you're raised. It comes from whether you can go without certain types of trauma that spin you off into a weird place. A lot of things. So I don't know if psychology could be fixed, but the idea would be to create people in a way as they come up into the world that they'll be able to cope with and enjoy the world and to contribute to it and get along with it in a harmonious and happy way. That's what the aim of psychology would need to be in order for us to be able to be in harmony and thrive with each other. And back to our friend Freud, what he says to do is dissolve everything that society put into your mind, dissolve even the notion of being civilized, get in touch with your primal animal sexual urges and live from there.
Oh, so he's attacking normativity. I understand now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it makes everybody into a freak.
That's why all the queer Marxists
and it ruins everything.
are
That's why the
Freudian.
queer Marxists love him. Exactly. He's saying he gave you the keys to hack the mind open and destroy normativity so that we spiral into a decayed sort of chaos. Because back to that certain group of people, they're a small, frightened minority who's always afraid that there's going to be another Holocaust, or they're going to drive us out of the country again, or they're going to rise up against us and notice that we've been stealing from them, or something like that. So when they can keep us in chaos and destroy our normative homogeneity, they're more comfortable that way. When there's a million different people groups around, their little small niche people group feels more safe. When they're just in a group of a million people that are all the same way and they're different than everybody else, they feel really scared. So when they're when our people, let's say, if I'm not one of them, right? When the outside group becomes homogeneous and strong, they get real uncomfortable. So they have an incentive to destroy our normativity. That's what I'm saying.
Do you know what another word for normativity is?
Are you going to say capitalism?
Yeah.
Let's move on.
I'm about to watch Glenn Beck do a deep dive on who's funding the campus protests. I'll report back and let you know how much he gets wrong. Thank you, Nuru2. I appreciate the service. Nice. Rottweiler says, Big Tech, enlighten us on why do they hate Larry Elder if you assert it's about racial whiteness.
Who's Larry Elder again? Isn't he somebody they'd call an Uncle Tom race trader?
He ran for governor of your state not too long ago.
Mm-hmm. Isn't he a white advocate? Doesn't he tell black people to act white?
I don't know that I've heard him say that.
Isn't it something like that? Doesn't he represent?
Isn't that Jesse Lee Peterson?
Right. There's a bunch of them. I think he's one of those. He's the black face of white supremacy. Right. I don't remember. Am I wrong? Who's Larry Elder then?
He's like some talk show host.
Who am I thinking of?
Are you thinking of like...
I mean, hard to answer the question. I can't remember who Larry Elder is.
All right. Rottweiler's just being a smartass anyway. We're not going to continue to argue about that, guys. All right, moving on.
Wilson's reception in Paris astounded Bernays and the other American propagandists. Their propaganda had portrayed Wilson as a liberator of the people, a man who would create a new world in which the individual would be free. They had made him a hero of the masses. And as he watched the crowd surge around Wilson, Bernays began to wonder whether it would be possible to do the same type of mass persuasion, but in peacetime.
Wait a minute, can you pause?
When I came back to the...
We should hear that again. Maybe you back up 30 seconds. But yeah, I just looked it up. He's who I thought. He made a documentary in 2020 called The Oral History of the Black Conservative. Yeah, he's right. They call him Uncle Tom. He's like a pro-Trump MAGA black. They hate that. They hate that. What they want is they don't want blacks to become integrated into a white homogenous culture. They want blacks to be progressive leftist agitator, like political organizers or thugs and criminals and gangsters. They want to make whites become against themselves, and they want blacks to be radical actors in that agenda. They don't want blacks
Right.
to get in line with the way that white people behave and support that. They hate that.
But that's actually the point, though, because they assume, and you're right about this, they assume that all black people should be socialist. They specifically targeted black-owned businesses to burn them down in 2020 in Minneapolis, because they don't like black people owning private businesses. But again, what's another word for that? Like, they expect all black people to be socialist. What's the opposite of socialist?
Carlin, we can do your dialectic all day.
I'm just saying. I feel like
not
I'm
just
making
like two types of people in the world, socialists and communists.
But I feel like
the
of
left
course
versus
there's
right,
not.
blue versus red,
But
socialist, communist.
I feel like I'm
Like,
making
why do you
valid
keep
points,
trying to
though,
pin me into that?
because I'm not trying to pin you into anything. I'm saying you can be whatever you want in the shadow realm. I'm just saying that I feel like I'm making valid points that are directly related to how you're framing things. And I think that it's an interesting thing to both look at your framing of it as someone who is absolutely not on the left, and then say, how does the left tweak this shit just a little bit to make their point in the world? Because ultimately, again, what we're like, I mean, the purpose of watching this is to learn how the communists, for lack of a better term at the moment, took over the world, right? Because that ideology springs from this.
The mass mind control propagandists.
Okay, fine.
Who were Jewish, by the way. Just happened to be.
Okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But why can't we make both points? If you don't want me to, I'll stop. But like, I just feel like it's a valuable thing to do. And I don't feel like I'm not making shit up.
When it's, I mean, what's the purpose of bringing it up? If they're not socialists, then what are they?
Well, but
What's
like,
that?
because I am not convinced that the radical revolutionary socialists that we watch, and you know this because we've talked about this, I am not convinced that that is descended from the Jews.
Mm.
Now, like I it's not excuse me, it's not that I don't see like your points in this regard, and it's not like, you know, you haven't made valid points like when we've been talking about this that influence my thinking on this. I'm just not all the way there yet. So I mean, if we're going to do this like 4-part thing, I might as well use it to be able to frame my point of reference around this, right? And maybe if I frame my point of reference around this, maybe other people will frame their point of reference around it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right. So that's why I think I'm just not, for me, from my perspective, it doesn't jive because like socialism as a concept, even that you're referring to, the way I hear you refer to it is like it's some sort of organic, spontaneous counter to capitalism that just happens to have occurred in the world. And there's just people who hate capitalism and they call themselves socialists. And that they actually believe that there's some sort of communist utopia that's going to be achieved. And what I see is that it's actually, that's literally just not true. That's not even what's actually going on.
But okay, but fair enough. But I also
That's
have
just
like,
what
I mean,
they say.
but I understand that, but I feel like you and I actually should be on the same team on this one, because yes, you're doing this for your audience and on your on kick.com/BigTech, if you guys want to follow them there. You're doing your thing over there. I'm doing it for my audience over here. Your audience is deeply aligned with what you are talking about. My audience is not deeply aligned with what you're talking about. And so wouldn't you want to use this as an opportunity to help my audience become aligned with what you're talking about?
That's what I'm attempting to do.
I know, but I'm attempting to do it as well. And I think one of the ways that that might be achieved is if we draw parallels between the two different perspectives that our audiences have. Because if you're saying
so let's do
something
that,
and I can
also
say,
can we also explore the differences so that yours can see
Yes.
my perspective and mine can see yours? Yeah,
Yes.
I think,
Yeah, we can. That's all I'm asking is if we can do both.
I think we are.
Okay. Jesus Christ.
What?
All right. Rottweiler has another super chat. Conversely, the same can be said about you, Big Tech. Rottweiler, don't be accusatory of our guest.
What's he say?
It isn't all about whites versus blacks when there's tons of prime source evidence that disproves you. Don't argue with him and talk about primary source evidence. He doesn't like it.
I'm not talking about whites versus blacks. I'm talking about Jews versus the world. Jews use blacks against whites. It's not whites against blacks. It's Jews using blacks to fuck up the whites. Because the whites have the power and the Jews are taking it. And the blacks, the black radicals, the black socialists, the queers, all of that, these are people that the Jews created as warriors in their campaign against the homogenous power structure. It's not whites versus blacks. It's blacks have been used as pawns to attack whites.
Well, but I think we would also agree on that. Honestly, I mean, like, so a couple months ago, when the fuck was this? Yeah, I think it was like a couple months ago. We watched some lecture at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and there's basically this professor, and I think I DM'd this to you at the time because I was having to concede a point that you were making to me that I didn't want to admit to. I think I shared it with you in some way, but like this professor was saying he was trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism to include anything against anyone that wasn't white, essentially, even if they weren't Jewish. So they were trying to say it was anti-Semitic to oppose closing the southern border because it impacted brown people, and that should be anti-Semitic.
Right, because if the whites see themselves as a group, Jews suffer. That's how they see the scenario. So they want to destroy our group identity. And if they see anything that strengthens us, that's what they attack. So that's why they will prop up certain types of music. That's why they'll prop up certain types of relationships. That's why they'll prop up certain types of economic systems. Anything that we have that strengthens us, that's what they're attacking. It's a operation of erosion and subterfuge. Okay, they're attacking the places like, where are the pillars of strength? Let's chip away at those so that it all comes down. Because if we are strong, that makes them feel afraid. They can't fit. They don't belong. They're different. They're outsiders. And that's by their own choosing, by the way. I'm not even just saying racially. They have a religious cult that's thousands of years old where they are the supreme rulers of the world by God's decree. They're the chosen people of God.
Okay, I need to push back on this because we're on YouTube right now, and I don't want to get my channel fucked up.
That's fine. Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about this, do you mean all the Jews, or do you mean like a tiny, like when Adam Green does it, where he's like a small subset of Jews are doing this, not all of them? Can we concede?
The powerful ones.
The powerful ones. Okay, fine. Yeah. So this is not about like all. We're not saying Jews are bad or that we hate Jews or anything like that. We're trying to look at group dynamics, okay?
That's all we're talking about. We're talking about groups. Yeah, I don't worship white. If I meet a white person, I don't go, "Oh, you're an amazing person because you're white." There's a lot of white scumbags.
Most white people
suck. A lot
suck.
of white pieces of shit.
We hate white.
Don't like at all.
We hate anyone else.
And then likewise, if I meet a Jewish person, I don't go, "Oh, you're an evil conspirator to destroy the world." It has nothing to do with individuals at all. But there are groups, and when you put the groups together, the group dynamic is different than the individual dynamic. So that's for sure.
That's fine. YouTube, we're fine with Jewish people here. YouTube, you're welcome if you're Jewish. I hate white men more than I hate Jews. Okay, can we continue? I think I rewound it.
Big slogan.
Wilson's reception in Paris astounded Bernays and the other American propagandists. Their propaganda had portrayed Wilson as a liberator of the people, a man who would create a new world in which the individual would be free. They had made him a hero of the masses. And as he watched the crowd surge around Wilson, Bernays began to wonder whether it would be possible to do the same type of mass persuasion, but in peacetime.
When I came back to the United States, I decided that if you could use propaganda for war, you could certainly use it for peace. And propaganda got to be a bad word because of the Germans using it. So what I did was to try to find some other words. So we found the word Council on Public Relations.
Bernays returned to New York and set up as a public relations counsel in a small office off Broadway. It was the first time the term had ever been used. Since the end of the 19th century, America had become a mass industrial society, with millions clustered together in the cities.
See,
Bernays,
I just want to show. See, when we explain it this way, people understand it. That's my only
It's
point.
great.
Okay.
Perfect.
Jesus.
was determined to find a way to manage and alter the way these new crowds thought and felt. To do this, he turned to the writings of his uncle Sigmund. While in Paris, Bernays had sent his uncle a gift of some Havana cigars. In return, Freud had sent him a copy of his general introduction to psychoanalysis. Bernays read it, and the picture of hidden irrational forces inside human beings fascinated him. He wondered whether he might make money by manipulating the unconscious.
What Eddie got from Freud was indeed this idea that there is a lot more going on in human decision making, not only among individuals, but even more importantly among groups, than this idea that information drives behavior. And so Eddie began to formulate this idea that you had to look at things that would play to people's irrational emotions. And you see, that moved Eddie immediately into a different category from other people in his field and most government officials and managers of the day who thought if you just hit people with all this factual information, they would look at that and say, oh, of course. And Eddie knew that was not the way the world worked.
Bernays set out to experiment with the minds of the popular classes. His most dramatic experiment was to persuade women to smoke. At that time, there was a taboo against women smoking.
Oh, right.
And one of his early clients, George Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, asked Bernays to find a way of breaking it.
He said, we're losing half of our market because men have invoked a taboo against women smoking in public. Can you do anything about that? I said, let me think about it. And then I said, have I your permission to see a psychoanalyst to find out what cigarettes mean to women? He said, what'll it cost? So I called up Dr. Brill, A.A. Brill, who was a leading psychoanalyst in New York at that time.
How come you didn't call your uncle? Why didn't you call your uncle?
Because he was in Vienna.
A.A. Brill was one of the first psychoanalysts in America. And for a large fee, he told Bernays that cigarettes were a symbol of the penis and of male sexual power.
What?
He told Bernays that if he could find a way to connect cigarettes with
Wait, so they wanted to make smoking sex, like they're equating cigarettes to a penis, but they're trying to make smoking sexier for women, so
yeah, they turned it into a symbol of power and basically a way of taking away male strength from men.
But why does it take away male strength from men?
Because only men are allowed to smoke back then. Now,
but why is that a sign of
like
strength?
Men?
Oh,
he's just finding the, the unconscious, the subconscious feeling that women had about the cigarette.
but why is smoking a sign of strength?
It was for men only. You're literally breathing fire and smoke. It's archetypal.
I guess, but I mean, smoking isn't necessarily great for you.
Sure, right.
So why would it be a
Being
sign
s-
of strength then?
Well,
Like I'm saying, like, is it one of those things that only men were doing, but really women were actually making the correct decision? Like that it lowered women to start smoking? You know what I'm saying?
it's not about. He literally just said a minute ago. It's about irrational decision making. This isn't a rational choice. It's not, when you think about it rationally, it's not strong to do it. It's also not rational to rush into battle with a sword against another guy with a sword. It's primal. There's something, and that's something men do. It's not a rational choice. It's an emotional choice usually.
Milo, what the fuck? Was that really necessary? Jesus Christ. My chat is being unruly because you're here.
By the way, Abraham Brill happens to be Jewish. A.A. Brill, the guy, the psychoanalyst he went to. But continue.
All right.
So this Jew decided, yeah, it's a symbol of the penis, and so they took a angle of sexualizing smoking and making it sexy for women to do it. It's a form of
Idea of
sexual
challenge-
liberation.
What's that say again? Sorry.
It was one of the first acts of female sexual liberation.
Oh, because now they were giving blowjobs in public, essentially, when they were smoking in public,
Right,
psychologically.
Yeah, something like that. There's a phallic symbol with the cigarette.
All right.
challenging male power, then women would smoke, because then they would have their own penises.
Yep.
Every year, New York held an Easter Day parade to which thousands came, and Bernays decided to stage an event there. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes. Then they should join the parade, and at a given signal from him, they were to light up the cigarettes dramatically. Bernays then informed the press that he had heard that a group of suffragettes were preparing to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom.
He knew
Torches
this would
of
be an
freedom.
outcry, and he knew that all of the photographers would be there to capture.
What'd you say?
They called it torches of freedom.
Torches of freedom.
They do it for freedom.
Sounds conservative.
This moment. And so he was ready with a phrase which was torches of freedom. And so here you have a symbol.
Oh, yo.
Women, young women, debutantes.
You know this? Hang on. Trivia. The guy who wrote the book Propaganda is the great uncle of the first CEO of Netflix.
Oh, you don't say.
Ha ha ha. Look
You
at
don't
that.
say. Yeah, so, yeah, right. Freud is Bernays' uncle, and then Bernays is the uncle of CEO of Netflix, which is it's basically a big propaganda agency.
Smoking a cigarette in public with a phrase that means anybody who believes in this kind of equality pretty much has to support them in the ensuing debate about this, because torches of freedom. I mean, what's on all American coins? It's liberty. She's holding up the torch, you see? And so all of this is there together. There's emotion, there's memory, there's a rational phrase, even though it's using a lot of emotional elements. It's a phrase that works in a rational sense. All of this is together. And so the next day, this was not just in all of the New York papers, it was across the United States and around the world. And from that point forward, the sale of cigarettes to women began to rise. He had made them socially acceptable with a single symbolic act.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent, an idea that still persists today.
Embrace me.
So then smoking was a way of attacking the patriarchy. Getting women to
Right.
smoke was a way of attacking patriarchy because it was making women independent than men.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay.
My sweet embrace.
It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
Eddie Bernays saw the way to sell product was not to sell it to your intellect, that you ought to buy an automobile, but that you will feel better about it if you have this automobile. I think he originated that idea, that they weren't just purchasing something, but they were engaging themselves emotionally or personally in the product or service. That it's not, you think you need a new piece of clothing, but you'll feel better with the piece of clothing. That was his contribution in a very real sense. We see it all over the place today, but I think he originated the idea of the emotional connect to a product or service.
What Bernays was doing fascinated America's corporations. They had come out of the war rich and powerful, but they had a growing worry. The system of mass production had flourished during the war, and now millions of goods were pouring off production lines. What they were frightened of was the danger of overproduction, that there would come a point when people had enough goods and would simply stop buying.
Yeah, you can't have that.
Nope.
Up until that point, the majority
What if we got to
of
where just everybody had enough and they were good? Nope. We gotta create some way to make them want more.
Do you know how socialists define equity?
Thank you for saying it that way. How do they define equity?
Mm-hmm.
No, enlighten us.
This is literally taught at the UCLA School of Education in their school where they teach like third graders. They teach third graders that equity means that everyone will have everything they need.
Everyone will have everything they need. Amazing.
Yeah. A society where everyone has everything they need. Do you know how they create that society?
Socialism.
By getting rid of capitalism.
Right.
Equity means socialism. Well, socialists believe equity means socialism.
Right. Sounds great.
But does it?
What, have everybody having everything they need? Sure.
Well, I mean, you don't own anything.
But you have everything you need.
But do you?
Either you
Is that
do or you don't.
possible? Is that possible? Is that possible to create a society in which everyone just has everything they need and you know nothing more is required?
Yeah, of course not.
Well, okay.
Not through an economic system, probably though.
What do you mean?
Well, like what they were referencing there was in the post-war industrial age, there was so much mass production. Everybody already had a ton of everything. Why go work and buy more when you already got enough?
Right. So you're buying.
So that
stuff
was
to
being
feel
created
good.
not by an economic system, but by an industrialization. So it's technology that gets us there, not economic systems.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, if we invent 3D printers that when you press a button, it'll just make anything you want for free. Is it socialism?
Well, is
No,
it really for free?
Yeah, if it just fucking fabricates it out of the ethereal energy of the universe, and it's like magic. If everybody had infinite magic.
So it transmutes just pure energy into like whatever we want, and we can think something in our head and push a button, and it doesn't cost anything.
Right. Everybody has the power of a god.
Okay, I mean, I guess that wouldn't technically be socialism then, because everyone has access to it, but it also never runs out.
Right. So that's the scam, is that it's always technological innovation that gives us success. The way that humanity goes forward, it's always innovation and discovery. It's always developed a new tool. We developed a new technique. We discovered some new land. We pulled the resources out of it. We made stuff with it. It's goods and services which are amplified by our technique for producing those things. And society and economy is just a way of having those things flow among each other. But the idea of we're going to innovate a different economy and that's going to then make everything better. Economy is just the way that we move the energy around. It's just who has what part of the share that we all have, and how do we divvy it up? Whose hands whose plate does this steak end up landing on? That's the only question that economy really answers.
But
Does
doesn't
it
that
end up on my
imply?
plate or your plate?
But doesn't that imply like private ownership of stuff? Like something can end up on your plate if you don't own it, right?
I mean, when my dad puts a steak on my plate when I'm 5 years old, do I own the steak?
Well, no, your dad owns the steak, but your dad
Right,
also
that's
owns you.
patriarchy.
But your dad
Right.
also owns you as the 5-year-old.
Exactly. So the idea that the imaginary idea that nobody would own anything is just like that doesn't exist.
Well, I'm not saying like there wouldn't be like, I mean, socialists do make a distinction and we don't tend to acknowledge it, but like they say there's a difference between personal property and private property, so that like technically you would own stuff, but I'm talking about big stuff. I'm like, you don't own the home that you live in. You don't own the land that you live on. You can't have a private business that you control. You don't have parental rights over your kids, so the state effectively owns your kids. You don't have individual liberties, and so
that's
the
where
state
we are.
effectively owns you.
That's really where we are now under this thing that we call capitalism.
But it's not, though. You can own a home. You can own land. You have
Can you?
right now.
All right,
Right
break
now,
it down.
even though.
I mean, stop. Hold a pause. Let's do one.
Okay.
Real estate. Do you know why it's called real estate?
Why?
It's another way of saying royal estate.
Okay.
Like real is a Latin way of saying royal. Like El Camino Real is like the royal road, right? So real means royal. So the reason it's called the royal estate means that it truly belongs to the royalty. It belongs to the king. The land of the nation belongs to the nation. You can purchase real estate and acquire a title to it, and as long as you pay your taxes on it, you have the right to do transactions on that property you have rights to the property, but you don't truly own it. If you stop paying the taxes, you lose it. It's gone. It's not actually yours. It's the royal estate. The land isn't yours. You just have title to the land that the government owns. That's what real estate means. That's why it has its own category of law and its own agents and all that stuff. It's because it's a special category of property. It's not yours.
Okay, fine, fair enough. But I mean, like, let's take kids though. I mean, even though you live in the state of California, you do still have, parental rights to a certain extent. Like your kids are your kids.
Right. You have rights, but you still don't truly even own them. They can take them from you as soon as you give them the right reason to. They have dominion over you and your rights to your own offspring. You're owned by the state. Even in capitalism, you don't actually have real property of your own.
All the more reason to be an anarchist.
Well, even that, I would say, I don't know if you know my angle on that, but that's what we actually are in. I mean, actually in anarchy, states emerge. And we truly are in anarchy. Everybody's doing as they choose already. There's just power. There's power groups that persuade you not to. And so you're just adhering mentally to certain ideas, but you are in an anarchical state. That's what nature is. Nature is anarchy. If you go to the jungle, it's anarchy. We just carved out a bit of the jungle and we created a thing that we call in our minds civilization. But we're still in anarchy. We're just living in an artificial bubble within it. But anarchy is not really a political system. We call it anarchy as if there's no government. Well, okay. That doesn't exist, though, because immediately what spontaneously emerges is gangs, and now you have a government again. You just have smaller state. A state is just a big-ass gang. And if you abolish the state, now you just have smaller gangs, but you still have a hierarchy. Whoever has the biggest muscles, biggest dick, biggest guns, whatever, he's going to run the show.
All right. Fair enough.
Were still sold to the masses on the basis of need. While the rich had long been used to luxury goods, for the millions of working-class Americans, most products were still advertised as necessities. Goods like shoes, stockings, even cars were promoted in functional terms for their durability. The aim of the advertisements was simply to show people the product's practical virtues, nothing more. What the corporations realized they had to do was transform the way the majority of Americans thought about products. One leading Wall Street banker, Paul Mazur of Lehman Brothers, was clear about what was necessary.
Mazur and Lehman.
We must shift America, he wrote, from a needs to a desires.
Wait, sorry, what'd you say?
Mazur and the Lehman Brothers, all Jews.
Hmm.
This isn't, by the way, this is not an anti-Semitic documentary. This is just naming the people who did all the stuff, and it's like every single one of them is Jewish. It just happens. It's just that way.
We don't hate Jews. Jews are fine. Jews are welcome here. YouTube.
Right. Totally.
Culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old have been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality in America. Man's desires must overshadow his needs.
Prior to that time, there was no American consumer. There was the American worker, and there was the American owner, and they manufactured and they saved and they ate what they had to, and the people shopped for what they needed. And while the very rich may have bought things they didn't need, most people did not. And Mazur envisioned a break with that, where you would have things that you didn't actually need, but you wanted, as opposed to needed.
And the man who would be at the center of changing that mentality for the corporations was Edward Bernays.
Bernays really is the guy within the United States, more than anybody else, who sort of brings to the table psychological theory as something that is an essential part of how, from the corporate side, of how we are going to appeal to the masses effectively. And the whole sort of merchandising establishment and sales establishment is ready for Sigmund Freud. I mean, they are ready for understanding what motivates the human mind. And so that there's this real openness to Bernays' techniques being used to sell products to the masses.
Beginning in the early 20s, the New York banks funded the creation of chains of department stores across America. They were to be the outlets for the mass-produced goods, and Bernays' job was to produce the new type of customer. Bernays began to create many of the techniques of mass consumer persuasion that we now live with. He was employed by William Randolph Hearst to promote his new women's magazines, and Bernays glamorized them by placing articles and advertisements that linked products made by others of his clients to famous film stars like Clara Bow, who was also his client. Bernays also began the practice of product placement in the movies, and he dressed the stuff.
So this essentially was like the impetus of like the whole women's rights thing then.
Yep.
Like all of it stemmed from like the cigarette.
Well, there were already suffragettes.
Well, yeah, but like in terms of like pop culture, because they weren't popular, right? Sorry.
There too. Yeah, no, but this is really sort of just like it just gave them all guns, metaphorically speaking. It armed them. It armed them in the same way that they developed this concept of propaganda in wartime to get everybody mobilized for a war against the enemy, or the war to make the world safe for democracy. And then they took that and they used it for the war on the consumer, and the war against the patriarchy, and the war for sexual liberation. So the war against the patriarchy, right? The war against men. Another way of calling the feminist liberation movement, the war against men. The ruling, the way that we just operated according to the fundamentals of rationality and need, they're switching it to desires, wants, and the underlying animalistic urges and stuff. Yeah, so they're weaponizing the women against the men with Bernays' techniques. It's kind of amazing.
Stars at the film's premieres with clothes and jewelry from other firms he represented.
And notice that it's all fabricated too.
He was, he claimed, the first person.
Go ahead.
You notice it's all fabricated too. Like there's somebody behind the curtain pulling the strings, and it's like, here's what you're gonna do, ladies. Some Jewish guy. He's like, you're gonna go out there with the cigarettes, tucked, and all at the same time on my signal, you're gonna take them out and light them up, and we're gonna brand them as torches of freedom. So it's like this. It's an op. Like it's always an op. It's not emergent. It's not organic. It's not like the women all just decided that they wanted to. It wasn't that. It was a ploy. Intentional.
But don't people always have the choice about whether or not they want to engage in that? You know?
No, I don't believe so, actually.
Why?
Like, does a dog have a choice to start salivating when you dangle a treat in front of him? He's a dog.
Well, I think we're a little bit more developed than a dog.
Well, Freud would disagree with you. He says that, what they discovered is that there's actually just a little bit more of a complex mechanism in the human psyche, but it's the exact same thing.
Well, yeah.
In the way you can hijack a dog's senses to make him do whatever you want, and you can get that dog to sit and lay down and heel and roll over and come and go and fetch and bring it back and attack you can make a dog do whatever you want because he's a dog. Once you understand his nature, you can develop tactics to just get him on board with doing whatever you want him to do, and he thinks he wants to do it.
Well,
And now
sure,
you just
but
blow a whistle, ring a bell, snap your fingers, and he's doing everything you want because he's a dog, and you cracked the code on dog language and dog needs, and they cracked the code on humans, and they've got us subconsciously controlled. They know how to make us think that it was our idea. He's literally he's explaining how you can change the will of a person through subconscious manipulation.
yeah,
So
and
they're changing our will. We don't have free will. We're animals.
But I understand that. I guess I reject the idea that we don't have free will because we can always make a new decision. Someone can choose to quit smoking or not start smoking at all. Someone can choose to quit drinking or not start drinking at all. Someone can choose to
But
not
you
have
can't
sex or
choose
not.
to
I mean,
think it's sexy or not if you don't know somebody's running that op on you. If all of a sudden you start thinking it's sexy and powerful and cool to smoke, you didn't make that choice. That idea was put in your head by a Jew. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. So that choice you didn't make. That was done to you. And now it's up to you whether or not you have the gumption and the wherewithal and the integrity and the awareness and all that stuff to overcome this thing that was put on you without your consent. That was programmed into your mind by the people who are hacking the matrix of your mind with psychology and psychoanalysis and all that stuff.
but we
That's what
have
this is
the.
about.
But I understand that. But what I'm saying is we do have the tools to overcome that. If we can, I mean, I think your point about like you have to understand what's going on in order to overcome it, fine, but we can overcome it.
Potentially, some people can. Many people can't. Many people are they're just underwater. And it's like, I mean, you can just want to take a breath, but if you're underwater, you're underwater. And if you can't get to the surface, you drown. And then that's it. And some people they're too deep. It's too much for them. It's too heavy. I can carry a certain amount of weight on my shoulders, but not all the weight. And there's a certain point where I can't carry it. There's just like more than I got in me. And that's how it is psychologically for everybody. Everybody's got a different limit. Everybody's got different makeup. Everybody's got different vices that are extra difficult for them to deal with. And you end up with a certain amount of thousands of people just living in the streets and people all twisted up sexually and people just lost in a million ways. It's like if a tornado comes through and rips your house off, it's like, that's just what happened. And this is like a psychological warfare tornado that came through our people. And that's like, well, yeah, you can rebuild and yeah, you can, find shelter real quick if you're lucky, but a lot of people can't. They just get swept up.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it.
Chad X says today it's the cell phone controlling everyone. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep.
I actually don't think I could give up my cell phone if I wanted to.
And who's the big sucker of the mind through the cell phone? Zuckerberg.
Well,
Just happens to be Jewish.
but you can choose not to
But-
have that app on your phone.
Right. But if you're a child, do you know that you should make that choice? You should not go to Instagram. You should not go to TikTok.
Well, your parents
not-
should be giving you one of those cell phones where you only get to go to the pre-approved websites.
Right. So if you're lucky as a child, you have a parent who has the wherewithal to protect you, but many don't.
Mhm.
So are they just making a choice to be mind controlled? They don't know.
Well, no, they're
You can't.
picking them up.
Right. So if like G.I. Joe said, if knowledge is power and you don't have the knowledge, then you're powerless to overcome this thing. And most people don't. They don't know what's going on. They think that these thoughts that they're having are their thoughts, and they're not. They were put there by them. by somebody else who hacked their brain.
So then how are so many people waking up? Because I think a lot of people are waking up.
Yeah, I think a lot are. I don't know how many. I mean, a lot more than 5 or 6 years ago. I've been watching it. It does seem to be accelerating, but it's because there's a lot of people out there battling for the ideas. There's a lot of people battling.
But what's different about it this time that wasn't true 5 years ago? Because there are always people battling for ideas.
Well, it takes time. It's not won overnight, but there is ground being gained, and there are people that are kind of being heroic about it day after day, grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. And another thing is that I don't know if you want to say the enemy, but let's say the perpetrators, they are sometimes overplaying their hand recently.
Mhm.
And we see things like October 7th, and we see things like, anyway, the border is wide open. It's upsetting a lot of people. And there were some black swan events. There are some things that happened that really boosted people's alertness. COVID was a big one. A lot of people started saying, what the hell? The media was lying to us and just covering things up like crazy. The election, we all saw Trump go over Biden, and that red line was way above the blue, and all of a sudden the blue went boop, it went right above the red, and we went, what the hell? Oh, mail-in ballots? Oh, they stole it? What the heck? A lot of key things are happening that are making people go like, wait. And then we can see with the advent of the internet, and Elon Musk, it was an anomaly. He went and bought Twitter from Jack Dorsey, and he exposed that they were all covering everything up, and they were in bed with the CIA, and he threw out all the blue-haired leftists from the organization in San Francisco. And now, like, little things are changing here and there. There's big moments, and it is making some difference. It really seems like it is. And again, with the overplaying of the hand too, there's a mass censorship that happened like 5 years ago. Anybody who was talking about stuff like this, candidly, frankly, without, like this has been out for a long time. It talks about a bunch of Jewish people, but it never mentions that they're Jewish. So this is allowed to stay. But 5 or 6 years ago, there was a huge banning. You remember the adpocalypse on YouTube and things like that happened? They
Vaguely.
just shut the door on everybody who knew anything that I'm talking about right now. Banished them from the internet, banished them from a lot of things, even like bank accounts. And you couldn't catch an Uber. You couldn't use Airbnb. You lost your PayPal. You lost everything all together, all at once. Everybody, Alex Jones, Nick, anybody who was active before, Adam Green, he lost everything. These people used to be growing and growing big, and then they just shut them all down because it was making a difference. So they all got banished to these little small parts of the distant internet, DLive, and Rumble's a new thing that didn't even exist during the banning. There was no free speech website. And so all of the, and then they started struggling again out in the wastelands and the boondocks where they got banished to, and they started building up these little alternative websites, and people started learning how to host things on their own servers, and reacting to they tried to shut it all down. But Trump coming in, even though Trump, you say what you want about his presidency and it wasn't all great, but even the idea that he started, before Trump, nobody called the news fake.
Yeah.
Trump walked around for years saying there's fake news, and everybody's like, what does he mean? And then everybody started realizing, holy shit, the news is just fake. They literally just lie. They are the Bernays propaganda organization now. And you think of it as CNN, MSNBC, trusted in news and stuff. These are all just propagandists at this point.
Trump is like the best propagandist. Sorry, Trump is like the best propagandist.
Yeah, in his way, absolutely. He really kind of mastered the art of it in a lot of ways. And he's been dealing with those people in New York for his whole life, by the way. So he picked up a few things, and he worked on NBC for The Apprentice. And anyway, but when you find out that CNN and MSNBC, these are all owned by those same people, that same group of people, it's always somebody named Larry Silver or something like that, or Berg or Steen or whatever. It's like, oh, these people own the propaganda agency that everybody gets their information from. And when COVID hit and when Trump hit and blah, 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 all these things, the ban waves hit, people start going like, what? And the more they go, why is it like that? What's going on? They are little bit here and there starting to sort of like see it. And then you get Andrew Tate literally calling it the Matrix. We have these anomalies, these people who break through and they go, this is all bullshit. They're all lying to you. They're controlling your mind. Wake the fuck up. And a bunch of people go, really? Oh, wait, holy crap. It is like that. That's starting to happen. It's very interesting. So we're in a weird time. There's been people saying it all along. If you go back and listen to, none of them were perfect, but if you listen to some of the old comedians, the subversive ones, usually they're not the Jewish ones. They're the Bill Burr, not the Bill Burr exactly. Bill Burr a little bit, but Bill Hicks. Listen to George Carlin. Some of these people in the 80s and 90s, they were talking about how it's a giant club and you're not in it. It's all lies. It's all bullshit. The news isn't trustworthy. It's all mind control. The church is a lie. Everything they were telling you, like, these are all just mind control agencies everywhere. Look at what they're doing to you. But we all just laughed. We, back then it would just be like, ha, this guy's hilarious. Look at him. He's talking a bunch of shit on the power structure. And it was kind of funny to do it back then. But now we're starting to look, 20, 30 years later. Holy shit, that was like spot on. That's actually literally what it is. It wasn't just a joke,
You know what's funny is I used to use George Carlin to try to explain how to say my name to people. So when I would like introduce myself, Carlin, like George Carlin. And this worked beautifully for years and years and years, up until about like maybe 10, 15 years ago, something like that.
They're like, who?
Yeah, well, no, that's exactly it. They were like, who? And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? You don't know who George Carlin is? But
yeah, we're becoming too old.
Yeah.
Yeah, the young people don't know.
You should watch George Carlin on your channel and teach your audience who he is if they don't know. It's a good idea.
To tell car companies they could sell cars as symbols of male sexuality. He employed psychologists to issue reports that said products were good for you and then pretended they were independent studies. He organized fashion shows in the department stores and paid celebrities to repeat the new and essential message. You bought things not just for need, but to express your inner sense of yourself to others.
There's a psychology of dress. Have you ever thought about it? How it can express your character? You all have interesting characters, but some of them are all hidden. I wonder why you all want to dress always the same, with the same hats and the same coats. I'm sure all of you are interesting and have wonderful things about you, but looking at you in the street, you all look so much the same. And that's why I'm talking to you about the psychology of dress. Try and express yourselves better in your dress. Bring out certain things that you think are hidden. I wonder if you've thought of this angle of your personality.
I'd like to ask you some questions. Why do you like short skirts?
Oh, because there's more to see.
More to see, eh? What good does that do you?
Much more handsome. It makes you more attractive.
Does?
In 1927, an American journalist wrote, "A change has come over our democracy. It is called consumptionism. The American citizen's first importance to his country is now no longer that of citizen, but that of consumer." The growing wave of consumerism helped in turn to create a stock market boom. And yet again, Edward Bernays became involved, promoting the novel idea that ordinary people should buy shares, borrowing money from banks he also represented. And yet again, millions followed his advice.
He was uniquely knowledgeable about how people in large numbers are going to react to products and ideas and so on.
Peter Strauss.
But in political terms, if he were to go out, so I can't imagine that he could get three people to stand and listen. Wasn't particularly articulate, was a kind of funny looking, and didn't have any sense of reaching out for people one-on-one. None at all. He didn't think about people in groups of one, thought about people in groups of thousands.
Like cattle.
So I would have nothing to do with it.
Hang on. Brucey is making a point in the chat. For instance, studies show cuckolding is great for your marriage, not working like it used to. People are seeing through it and mocking it through memes. They hate that. I mean, but like, okay, so I understand what you're saying, but like, and I understand what you're probably going to say is like, we need to look at the rule, not the exception. Okay, fine. But not all marriages work by the same rules. And so it's kind of like when you have instances like this, I get what you're saying in terms of like they were using studies to create propaganda to make people believe that they wanted something that they didn't want. Fine, but isn't there something to be said for the fact that just like not all like there are nuances, and if people think that only one type of thing is acceptable, they might not find what nuances work for them.
I don't understand the comment.
What do you mean? I think what he's saying is that they were manipulating studies to make people think that they wanted something they didn't actually want.
Yeah, they do that a lot. But their main way is usually through advertising and media. As you'll see, like that's how Bernays does it. It's like renaming things instead of propaganda. Oh, that's got a stink on it because of Hitler. Oh, we'll call it public relations. Cigarettes, smoking. No, we'll call it torches of freedom. That's one way. And then the other way is through, Hollywood and television and stuff. They'll, what's the concept of a father of a family now? It's Homer Simpson. It's Al Bundy. It's Peter Griffin. It's some big, fat, lazy, oaf, doofus, retard. The mom is the only one with a brain. She's always saving the day. The son is a rebellious little asshole. The daughter is like a genius who plays saxophone and she can do anything. And so it's like always these ways of subverting the cultural idea of what it is to be a dad, what it is to be a boy, what it is to be a man and a woman. Like the women are always smart and virtuous and cool. Sometimes they're a little emotional, but they're usually right. And then the husband, the way he smooths things over is by succumbing to her and submitting to her and apologizing. And then everything's cool again. So you have a million rom-coms that are that way. And who's putting all this out? It's not just because that's what we like. It's because that's what they want us to be like. It's intentional. It's not just because Jews are the best ones at making movies. It's because they have a reason to make movies. It's not just for the profit. They do want to make profit on their big blockbusters, of course. But the reason this certain script gets passed through the producer's office and not that one, many, many times, every time, it's because, is this one in alignment with our agenda? How do we want the people to be? What do we want them to be like? What heroes do we want them to have? What role models will we push forward in society? They're the ones making those choices.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, though, but it's not every time that script gets pushed through. There are times when the antithesis to that gets pushed through. There are movies and TV shows about strong men.
Are there?
I mean, Vikings, that was about strong men. Mad Men, that was mostly about men in the advertising world.
Mad Men's, yeah, exactly. It's about Madison Avenue, which is really...
Well, yeah, but it was...
Madison Avenue is Jews.
But in Mad Men...
and what do?
Yeah,
they
okay,
glorify that. They glorify the Jewish angle in Madison Avenue advertising, and they have it played by a tall, handsome, Aryan John Hamm.
But isn't that what you want?
Wait,
is that what you're saying?
White? Is he Jewish?
But like, but in Mad Men, there was also the traditional family structure. It did. I mean, there was the strong, powerful man that went out and ruled the roost and brought money home to his family, and his wife stayed at home. Well, I mean, the first couple seasons were pretty good.
I got to be honest. I got to rewatch Mad Men.
Well, I mean, and I haven't seen it in a while either. But my recollection is like it's not like the family fell apart in the first season. The family fell apart when they needed to create more drama in the series because it kept getting renewed, right? But for like the first couple of seasons, they did have that like traditional kind of structure.
Did she end up dissatisfied with him? Did he end up cheating on her?
Well, yeah, but not right away.
Well, yeah. Oh, but it did happen.
Well, yeah, but I mean that stuff needs to happen at some point when they create more seasons. Otherwise, there's no point in watching it.
So you gotta have them destroy it all.
I mean, okay. What about the Brady Bunch?
You mean two divorcees who blend their families?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it did it did have a traditional structure to it in that the man worked, the woman stayed home.
Actually, he worked from home. He was an architect, but it was still all about him raising his wife's daughters.
Well, didn't the wife die though in that instance? It wasn't divorcees. Didn't they die?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But it still wasn't. It wasn't a traditional family. It was a blended.
Well,
it was a blending.
I mean, okay, fine, but like it's
Actually,
not like
I'll give you you know what's the most traditional Americana, like, strong family values, father show of all time?
Sure.
It's the Cosbys.
Okay.
They literally made a black doctor who's like the good man who his wife is sexually attracted to him, and he has the answers to everything, and he's the main character because he's cool and smart.
And that was okay because he was black, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to come up with more examples.
Hello? Bernays soon became famous as the man who understood the mind of the crowd. And in 1924, the president contacted him. President Coolidge was a quiet, taciturn man and had become a national joke. The press portrayed him as a dull, humorless figure. Bernays' solution
can you pause
was
real
to do
quick?
exactly the same as he had done with products.
Yeah. Clutch brought up a good point. We used to have it. It used to be Little House on the Prairie. And it used to be Andy Griffith, where he's this smart, wise sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that there were things like that. And in the comedies were like, there was the sitcoms were like Green Acres, where he's got the goofy wife who's always kind of causing trouble and he's fixing it for her. Even Lucille Ball with I Love Lucy, even though that was a blended because he was Cuban or whatever, it was still that he was, the competent, skilled, talented performer, and she was always like, duh. That was more accepted back then. It was very slowly working these weird angles, but it was still always a masculine leading man. And that was, and they found ways to make it interesting and compelling and funny and had drama and stuff. And it wasn't always scandal, and it wasn't always the strong woman who's always right and the man's a dopey idiot. It became that as they worked it more and more toward that.
Honestly, Little House on the Prairie, though, it was boring as shit. It was really boring. Like, no one wanted to watch that. It's supposed to be entertainment.
Totally untrue. It was like famous and everybody loved it.
It was. Did you ever watch it?
Well, I mean, you're a child of what year were you born?
I was born before you.
How old are you?
29.
Yeah, okay.
I was born in 1981.
Whoa,
Yeah.
You are older than me.
I know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, still, the point is that show was like wrapped up when we were like little kids or before that, but it was for a different generation. It wasn't for our generation. So it was already old when we were kids.
Okay.
My point is, like, in that time, it was great. It was fine. It's iconic. It's an iconic classic. Everybody knows about it. It wasn't boring. And in fact, the stories are really great. There's always some conflict, but it's like, oh shit, there's Indians, or oh shit, somebody fell in the well, or oh no, the thing burned down, or there was a thief who came into town, or like those are totally fine. There's nothing wrong with those plot lines. And people will enjoy those. If that's what they have, they will enjoy the hell out of that. It doesn't always have to be a sex scandal. It doesn't always have to be that somebody's gay. It doesn't always have to be somebody's cheating on somebody or having an interracial marriage or something. Like the Scarlet Letter is like an old cautionary tale about a woman who cheats and stuff, but like that wasn't about making it normalized. It was sort of about having compassion for her, but it was also it was a cultural critique, but it used to be scandalous for somebody to have a child out of wedlock, but now it's just like, we're all the way to normalizing it.
Okay. How old did you think I was?
I thought you were in your 30s.
Well, win for me.
Nice.
He persuaded 34 famous film stars to visit the White House. And for the first time, politics became involved with public relations.
And I lined up these 34 people, and I'd say, "What's your name?" He'd say, "Al Jolson." I'd say, "Mr. President, Al Jolson."
Wait a minute. Hold on. We got to pause.
Okay. Go ahead.
Milo Hoffman's mentioning Happy Days. Well, who's the main character in Happy Days?
I have no idea.
The Fonzie. It's Fonzarelli.
Okay.
He's a Jew. Anyways, he's like the cool rebel, right? The cool guy. Hey, oh, everybody looks up to the Fonzie, worry about him. He's tough. He can fight anybody, jump his motorcycle and stuff. So they made a Jewish hero, of course.
In the United States had a front page story. President Coolidge.
Now you're right that Ron Howard was the main character, but he wasn't the cool kid.
At White House. And the Times had a headline which said, President nearly laughed. And everybody was happy.
But while Bernays became rich and powerful in America, in Vienna, his uncle was facing disaster. Like much of Europe, Vienna was suffering an economic crisis and massive inflation, which wiped out all of Freud's savings. Facing bankruptcy, he wrote to his nephew by arranging for Freud's works to be published for the first time in America, and began to send his uncle precious dollars, which Freud kept secretly in a foreign bank account.
He was Freud's agent, if you will, to get his books published. Well, of course, once the books were being published, Eddie couldn't help himself but to promote these books, see that everybody read them, make them controversial, emphasize the fact that, do you know what Freud says about sex and what he says cigarettes are a symbol of and so on?
I mean, isn't there something to be said for the fact, though, that like if we as human beings are so attracted to this type of stuff, then isn't this just how we're wired? Like, and doesn't that, like, are we really meant to go against that programming?
That's, to me, the same as saying, well, aren't buildings like predisposed to falling down into the ground because of gravity? So shouldn't buildings all collapse into the ground because gravity's pulling on everything? Don't they want to fall into their footprint?
Well, no,
yeah,
because
but we build against gravity.
yeah,
That's
but
how we make the thing go up into the sky.
But we understand the laws of nature that we are required to follow in order to build that thing. It's not just like we're inventing it out of nowhere.
So if we want to build a society of high trust that works well, we have to adhere to certain rules and not violate them. If you violate those rules, everything falls apart.
But doesn't that
gravity
go against,
naturally makes it go down?
But I mean, doesn't that go against like just the nature of what we are? Are we meant to be just these atomic, like robotic beings that just follow
the nature
the rules?
of what we are is that we're apes.
I think people.
So we should be just out there, just walking around naked, ripping each other's face off, and the strongest man gets all the bitches, and that's it.
Well,
end of story.
To a certain extent, that does happen.
But
though.
if you want to live in a human society, in a modernized, artificial world, like I was saying, like we developed technology, roads, agriculture, and a million other things. If you want to live that way, where there's a system of exchange and trust with each other, you have to live artificially. So we are living unnaturally. We've made modifications to our natural behavior.
But human beings are also natural explorers. Like they want to go beyond the boundaries of things. They want to try new things. They want to, they want to experiment. And that's how we figure out how to do these things. And that's by pushing boundaries and saying, like, why do we have to stop here? Why can't we go do this thing over here? So we never get to the place where we can build the buildings if we don't do that.
Well, we have to do it with regard and respect for what do we want? Do we want to survive? Do we want to thrive? Do we want things to be good? Or do we want to live in filth and do we want to disintegrate? And if we go too far, if we give into our impulses too much, if we don't put limits, if we don't have any place where we say no, that if everything's on the table, then the building falls down.
Mm-hmm.
You have to adhere to the laws of, what the architecture knows. These things will withstand this amount of stress. And so we have to build it this way. If we don't build it this way, if we compromise this or that part of it, it's all going to fall down. So you have to say no to certain designs. Certain are acceptable and certain are not. So how do we want to design our society? How do we want to design our behavior, design our laws, design our social morals, our mores? If we adhere to the design, everything goes swimmingly. And there's certain room that we can deviate with creativity, and you can creatively build, whatever type of architecture you want within the parameters of what will work. But if you go outside of what works, you end up with disaster. So you can't just do anything you want. You have to do things that work. And you can be creative with that. And so you can cross the street as long as you cross at the crosswalk when you look both ways, when the light's red for them and the thing, then everybody's safe. But if you just cross the road whenever you feel like it without regard for traffic, your kids get run over.
But you
So
just
you
said the
have to
magic
know when.
words, which is without regard for traffic. Like if you're in the middle of
Right.
the city and you look both ways and there's just no traffic coming and there's no crosswalk, you can still cross the street and be fine.
Right. But if you eliminate the idea that it's important to look both ways, say, fuck looking both ways. Do whatever your heart tells you to do. Like, all right, well, then we just got the roads are covered in blood then. It's like, well, I should just be able to walk wherever I want, whenever I want. Cars should look out for me because I'm loud and proud. Like, okay, no. We want the cars to be able to drive. The cars have the right of way here. We value your life, so we ask you to look both ways and adhere to safe crossing practices. We don't want the cars to be constantly like, oh shit, anybody's going to jump out at any time. That's chaos. We want the cars to be able to travel down the roads freely, and then people watch out for cars.
I mean, I guess so. And I understand what you're saying, but then I also think about like when I was in Peru and I was being driven around Lima and I literally thought I was going to die because the traffic was so insane and so unlike anything it is here. And so it's not like I'm not saying I thought that was ideal, but I'm saying that there are other societies that don't have the same traffic rules that we do, that it still kind of works. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to set it up. Like I said, like going back to before, a cultural homogeneity really just means like whatever you guys are all agreeing to, everybody's going the same way. Everybody's doing the same thing. So if it's just kind of, we live kind of wild here. All right, but everybody's doing that. So it kind of works. But if it's like everybody's adhering to certain rules here, and then there's a certain group who's just not, that messes it up.
Okay. So that makes more sense to me. So what you're talking about is like, we in this space have decided that we want to follow kind of like these are the socially acceptable guidelines. This is how we built society. This is what works for us. And like, if we take like this custom that is from another society, it's not to say that custom is necessarily bad or wrong. It just doesn't work in this society, but it could work over in this society where they've agreed to follow a different set of norms.
Right.
And those two things can be separate. It's cool.
Yeah, and if you compare societies, you might find, oh, this one who goes by these rules, this one's killing it. That other society is staying sort of regressive. They're not really maturing. They're not developing very much industry. Their technology is sort of lagging behind. They're kind of needing other cultures to feed theirs. They're in debt a lot. Oh, this one might want to adopt this other new innovative society where they have certain types of rules, certain type of behavior, certain type of standards. This is killing it over here. This school over here that has rigid discipline and a very excellent curriculum produces the greatest outcome for the students, where this other school to sort of just like do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. What if that one doesn't work as good? You might want to switch.
Reagan is giving a great example. This is like a perfect example. So in my chat, there are like rules of the chat that people have to follow. Otherwise, they get kicked out of the chat. In Nick Rekieta's chat, there were no rules at all, and everyone could post anything they wanted. And I think I would argue that actually led to the downfall of Nick Rekieta, was him surrounding himself with like the most toxic possible people on the internet because he didn't have rules around how his space was run.
And look at how he lives his life. There was like no rules. Exactly. Him and his wife go to like a hedonism vacation, and they're like fucking other people, and they're doing drugs, and they're just like wild and drunk on stream and all this stuff. It's like, all right, well, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Like that's the oldest fucking thing. Like, what do you want me to tell you? And so our society in the West, or the European excellence concept or whatever, the idea is to play an intelligent game. That's what they've been trying to do. That's what our old philosophers were saying. Is like, what's the best way to play this game? All right, what if we set it up this way? What about a republic? What about an education program? What about a civil infrastructure? And we developed all these ways, and there's different ways to do it. The Chinese and the Japanese, they figured out their own way for their people. One of them's on a small little island. One of them is like the descendants of warlords. So they got different environments. You adapt your strategy to your environment and the people that you have, and you figure out the one that works best for you. And then you try to get everybody to like get with the program. And then if the program needs to be modified, you're making modifications that are reasonable, rational, and aimed at a better outcome. And then we have this one back to that group who's like, fuck your program. Your program is a danger to me and my people. I'm going to think of ways to undermine your program, dissolve it, and make it more comfortable for me to be in. And that's essentially how I see the issue.
Okay.
It's not. It's not that we have an evil people, or not that we have a demonic people, nothing like blood libel, nothing like that. It's just like they have a strategy that's for their benefit that's actually quite rational, but it's against us.
So let me just explain this back just so I can make sure I have it correct. So what you're suggesting is like let's just say like the United States had like this culture that maybe there were differences here and there, but pretty much everyone like agreed to these things. We're talking like back in like I don't know, I don't know the exact date, but I'm gonna say like the the 30s, the 40s, 50s, something like that. Would you agree to that? Is it like a time frame? If we're thinking back to when the shows were about like strong men and all this stuff, that would be like the 40s, 50s, something like that.
Yeah, that's when it was, it was still in the early days, right? In the early days of film. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we had this kind of like hegemonist, like culturally hegemonist society where people were getting like
more or less. It was already, it was about to go through the, civil rights movement. It was already totally more or less integrated. But I mean, these are films that were produced before the 60s, right? So think about that. Yeah, pre-60s.
But I'm gonna make a point that you might not like the road I'm going down, but I'm gonna go down it anyway because it's my channel too. Okay.
Let's hear it. Yeah, I am a guest on your channel.
All right. So we had
your guest on mine too. I'm streaming.
I know it's like we can both take turns. Mm-hmm. So we had this culturally hegemonist society, like 30s, 40s, 50s, and then some like subversive messaging started getting inserted into the society, first from like women smoking cigarettes, which is like walking down the street with like a penis in your mouth, which is why it's sexy, to like, then they started getting all these women's magazines that had all these different clothes and hats, and maybe they even, started thinking about getting a job outside of the work or outside of the home and stuff like that. So he started having like these subversive messagings that come from Edward Bernays and all of his psychological fuckery that he was getting from his uncle, Sigmund Freud. And so those subversive things started getting inserted, which around the same time, the Frankfurt School came over to Columbia University in around 1937 or so and started setting up shop. So that kind of also seems to align with this. Also subverting, trying to subvert the different institutions by taking over higher education and then K through 12 education, where they were also mirroring the subversive messaging that was going on in society. And so that led to the civil rights movement in like the 60s and all this stuff, and it's been downhill ever since. Do I have that right?
That's all correct, but I would add that it was already happening much earlier than that. Like you just saw that the suffragettes and stuff, that was in the 20s.
Yeah,
and
I'm
so
not saying it didn't
the
exist.
seeds were already planted. And I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball, she was smoking on the show. Like we were already, even when this film was early and television was early, it had already begun, but it didn't just have so much room to like fully bloom itself. It was just like little bits, so we still had mostly a remnant of the concept of like the Americana, which was the white European settler moving west. And the early shows were all westerns, and it was like white heroes and sheriffs against white bandits and things like that, and Indians. So it was cowboys and Indians, but it was 40s, 50s, post World War II, which, remember, did the good guys win World War II? I don't know, but we won. And then we started getting this, the propaganda machine really like was in first gear, and it was picking up speed ever since then. It was really going.
Did you ever watch that show on Amazon?
Now we're at full freeway speed with Netflix and all that, and in CNN. Like now we're just like cruising in the jet stream of propaganda.
Did you ever watch that show on Amazon that was about like what if the Nazis won World War II? The Man in the High Castle.
A couple episodes only.
Did you like it?
No, I mean, no, it was.
That's why you only watched a couple episodes.
No, that's like that's a Jewish Holocaust fantasy. It's like a Jewish persecution fantasy.
I know. I was just thinking about it, and I don't really remember it, and so I was like, I wonder, I was thinking about like going back and like revisiting it, like what, like how did this actually resemble what might have happened?
Right.
But you're saying no, it's just propaganda, so probably not.
Who knows what would have happened? But I mean, it wouldn't be good for us to be perfect. I mean, at least not in the short term, because Hitler he didn't like America. He saw us all as a nation of mutts and mongrels, which in a way, he might have been right.
Well, that's why I'm asking, because Go ahead. Sorry.
It would have been, let's say, if he had his way and like the program went all the way through, it would have been comfortable. It would not have been a comfortable transition for everybody. Let's say.
Well, that's kind of like what I'm insinuating, though. Like I'm wondering, like because that was a very different culture than America. So conceivably, if Hitler had one, it would have been a painful thing for Americans to be ruled over by that type of philosophy. So I'm just like, I'm wondering how like was the reality of the show kind of like maybe a potential like could that have actually happened? That's all. Does that make sense?
Maybe actually I can't say for sure. I didn't like get into it. Maybe I'll go watch it.
Yeah. Might be interesting to
episodes in. You don't really know what the show's about in the first couple of episodes anyway. You don't really know what the ultimate, message or vision of it is. It's just getting cooking. But
it might be interesting to watch again.
Yeah, maybe I should check it out.
All right.
So forth. How do you suppose all those stories got out? Certainly the academics weren't spreading these around the country. Eddie Bernays was. Then, when Freud became accepted, well, then, of course, to go to a client and say, well, Uncle Siggy, see, then that had some cachet. But notice there, first Eddie created Uncle Siggy in the U.S., made him acceptable, secondly, and thirdly, then capitalized on Uncle Siggy. Typical Bernays performance.
Bernays also suggested that Freud promote himself in the United States. He proposed his uncle write an article for Cosmopolitan, a magazine that Bernays represented, entitled A Woman's Mental Place in the Home. Freud was furious. Such an idea, he said, was unthinkable. It was vulgar, and anyway, he hated America. Freud was now becoming increasingly pessimistic about human beings. In the mid-20s, he retreated in the summers to the Alps, sometimes staying in an old hotel, the Pension Moritz in Berchtesgaden. It is now a ruin. Freud began to write about group behavior, about how easily the unconscious aggressive forces in human beings could be triggered when they were in crowds. Freud believed he had underestimated the aggressive instincts in human beings. They were far more dangerous than he had originally thought.
After World War I, Freud was basically a pessimist. He felt that man is an impossible creature, a very, very sadistic and bad species, and did not believe that man can be improved. Man is a ferocious animal, the most ferocious animal that exists. They enjoy torturing and killing, and he didn't like man.
The publication of Freud's works in America had an extraordinary effect on journalists and intellectuals in the 1920s. What fascinated and frightened them was the picture Freud painted of submerged, dangerous forces lurking just under the surface of modern society. Forces that could erupt easily to produce the frenzied mob, which had the power to destroy even governments.
But it wasn't like magic that Freud's ideas took off in America. It was all manufactured, and they kind of made it seem like it was just like, I mean, I've often wondered, why do certain ideas or books that aren't actually even that great, why do they take hold? Well, the only way they can take hold is if they're manufactured. Like that is
right
selected.
His nephew represented Cosmopolitan magazine. He said, let's make people love you, and then you'll write a book, and then we'll promote the book. That's how they do it. That's literally it. You get selected and elevated. And then it becomes like, oh, everybody just takes it for granted that this person was right.
Yeah. The movie was making it seem, though, like this just happened. It's just like Freud came over here and his ideas were taking all these journalists by storm because he had an article in Cosmopolitan. But it's almost like it's not even just in Cosmopolitan, though. I would think it would have to be manufactured on another level, too. Because, then
they have the reviews go out, and those are manufactured, too. And you have the critic who says this is great, and he's on the pay. Exactly.
Because it's not enough just to get a big piece in I've had big pieces in magazines. I was on NPR. I had all this big media coverage, and it's if you just have the one, it's fine for a time, but if you aren't specifically identified as like, we're going to put a lot of money in marketing and all this stuff behind someone, you don't get anything after that kind of like initial spike. So it really has to be like an organized, ongoing PR campaign.
Yep. Absolutely. Which is why.
It was this they believed
Oh,
had
hang
happened
on.
in Russia.
Hang on. Go ahead. Sorry.
While I think some of it did, backfire a little bit. Some oftentimes they're not perfect with this. Sometimes they overplay their hand, or they select the wrong one to elevate, or something like that. And in a degree, I think there was this with Trump. I think he was manufactured too. Even though he was sort of, there was the escalator moment and everything. And there was a little bit of, they couldn't help it. A lot of the media kind of like bought into it because it was sexy and it was scandalous and it was like scary. And if it bleeds, it leads, so there was a lot to that. But also I think he was in a way set up to it. And even if you look at the first time that he ran for president, if you remember, it was actually back in the 90s against Pat Buchanan. And it was really just a ploy between him and Robert Stone to shut down Pat Buchanan, who was talking about the Jewish power structure. And that's why they went after him. Trump ran just to edge Buchanan out because Buchanan was talking about Zionism and the neocons who were all Jewish. And they were like, we got to get this anti-Semite out of here. So they ran Donald Trump to just destroy his third position party. And then when Trump came around again, the thing is, Trump belongs to these people. Like, he is selected for a reason, and he plays in the, I don't know if he's owned exactly, but he's in the pocket of and on the side of the people who will, even if he's promoted as a boogeyman, he's still promoted and it serves their purpose. He's part of the propaganda program. And he's a little bit of a maverick in a way where sometimes he even bumbles his way into doing something amazing. Like I said, with the fake news thing.
Yeah.
Like, that was incredibly helpful. Woke up tons of people. The fact that he normalized the concept of fake news media. That was maybe even his biggest contribution. And it wasn't Make America Great Again. I mean, Ronald Reagan said the same thing. So it's like, but and then Ronald Reagan too, an actor. So these people are sort of put up and selected for certain reasons and qualities. It's not just an organic, he was the best guy for the job. It's never really that. And he was in debt to people that we don't even know about since way back. I mean, he was underwater for billions of dollars to the banks back because of his Taj Mahal gambling casino that went belly up, and he was bankrupt and he was done. And they rebirthed him, and all of a sudden they made him into a TV star on the NBC, which was owned by them.
Well, they could
and
control
used for
him.
all these things.
They can
Exactly.
control because of the money. So that's what I was thinking. Because like I was elevated by conservative media in 2020 for no good reason. I had just come out of nowhere. All I had was like a viral article on the internet, and then all of a sudden I was on Dave Rubin's show all the time, and I had a PragerU video, and I did all this stuff, and I was elevated, and it was made very clear to me when that happened. Like, it's not like they hand you a list of rules and say, like, you have to say this, but it's made very clear. Here are the talking points. And if you deviate from these talking points, you really shouldn't deviate from these talking points. These are the talking points. And the minute that you start to deviate at all, even a little bit, that's when they started planting smear campaigns on me. That I know exactly where they came from, and they were like smear campaigns for like no good reason. Like they like after I tweeted, like I was like in this, I think I told you about this before, but I'll just repeat because it's relevant. Like I was in this philosophical discussion on Twitter for like 2 hours where I was being a trolly little bitch, honestly, and I said something effective like, Hitler went to heaven and blah blah blah, like all this stuff just to piss people off. But they took that, like within less than 24 hours, took it out of a 2-hour discussion. And I had a hit piece on me that wasn't even like correct in terms of what I did, and like, oh, this anti-Semite and all this stuff. And then I was like canceled by everything. And it's like, at that point I was like, why the ever-loving F do you guys even care about a tweet from me? Because I wasn't even in the political space anymore at that point, but I had deviated too far off of like what I was allowed to say, that not only was it enough that they just like were pretty much ignoring me at that point, but they had to destroy me.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I was like,
totally
this makes no sense. I literally have no relevance at all. And you guys are writing a hit piece on me in Newsweek. This makes no sense at all.
You got to be on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. If whether you know it or not. And if you don't get it, They don't care. Like, oh, you didn't get that this was a team. Oh, you didn't
Yeah.
get that we have an agenda. Oh, you didn't get that there was an underlying direction that we're all going, and you're not with it. Well, then then you're out. You got to be sacrificed.
It's not just that you're out. It's like you are destroyed for all time. And that's
What
and
I
I
mean.
think
You're out of being relevant to anything, and your credibility is just they'll character assassinate you.
and I think it's so interesting to look, and this is why I just I call people out so often, because I don't care. Like, I've built enough of my own thing that I feel pretty comfortable at this point. But like, it is so easy to tell who's kind of playing the game and using the approved talking points and who's not. And it continually amazes me when people are elevated, but people can't see that the people who are elevated are just following the talking points. But then you look at all the things that they aren't covering, you look at the things they refuse to say, and it becomes very obvious and almost just like fake and inauthentic and gross.
Happened to me too in the small sphere that you saw me come from. As soon as I had something to say that wasn't sweeping for the party line or staying within the bounds that they had set, the same people that have offended you and everything from that group, they all came after me with the craziest smear and the most insane vitriol, and just absolutely trying to destroy any not even credibility. I was sort of nobody. I was just hanging out, but they had to like murder me publicly. They had to character assassinate.
It's like excessive too when it happens. You're like literally like, bro, like what the fuck? Like this makes no sense at all, right?
So in a way, I mean, Freud was right. Well, we just heard him say that he became really pessimistic after World War I, and he realized that humans are a wretched animal. We really do have a nature that is extremely cruel, sadistic, tribalistic. We are, at our best, we are enlightened apes, but also at our worst, we're just like the most terrifying ape. So we swing both ways very, very widely. So that's why it's so, in my view, crucial, critical, that as we bring ourselves up, and if we want to survive and get along, if we want to get along with each other, because we're so fucking horrible, if we want to get along with each other in a social way, we have to have like some really intelligent guidelines for our behavior. And we have to enforce that those are behaved in accordance with. And we have to cultivate the best in ourselves and suppress and overcome the worst in ourselves in order to survive and get along. And when we start deviating from awareness of that, we literally just descend into madness, and we eat each other psychically and eventually physically, in like a zombie apocalypse or something. But right now we're psychically eating each other, and we're destroying the fabric of civilization and society that holds us together with those rules and agreed upon codes and practices that allow us to get along. And those people who you're calling socialists and radical activists and queers and all this, that's all just developed, implanted, intentional designs to undermine the code of conduct that allows us to get along with each other and thrive and have nice things. And it's elevating, it's causing us to descend into the low impulse of sex and hate and division and greed and jealousy over inequalities and all this stuff. It's turning us into savages. That's where it is intended to take us.
All right. Fair enough. Chad X, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it.
To many, this meant that one of the guiding principles of mass democracy was wrong. The belief that human beings could be trusted to make decisions on a rational basis. The leading political writer, Walter Lippmann, argued that if human beings were in reality driven by unconscious, irrational forces, then it was necessary to rethink democracy. What was needed was a new elite who could manage what he called the
He looks like,
herd.
you know who he looks like?
Oh, hang
This
on.
would be done through
Go ahead.
Once he looks just to me, he could.
You want me to go
my
back?
brother. Yeah.
Him?
Go to the part where he's dancing. He's a little younger.
Rethink democracy.
He looks like who's that guy
What
with the
was
podcast?
needed was a new.
He looks like shit. What's that guy's name? The really slow talking podcast guy who's got everybody coming onto his show.
Patrick Bet David.
No.
No. That's what he looks like to me.
He looks like Bet David to you? Yeah,
A
maybe a
little bit.
little in the
Oh
eyes.
no. Lex
Friedman.
Friedman. Lex
Yeah.
Friedman.
Looks like Lex Friedman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
All right,
agree.
that's it. I just wanted to say, look at him. That's a Lex Friedman style Jew. All right. There's different
New
different
elite
styles.
who could
There's different styles, different varieties.
Yeah.
manage what he called the bewildered herd. This would be done through psychological techniques that would control the unconscious feelings of the masses.
Look at that. That's a Lex Friedman smile.
So here you have Walter Lippmann, probably the most influential political thinker in the United States, who is essentially saying that the basic mechanism of the mass mind is unreason, is irrationality, is animality. He believes that the mob in the street, which is how he sees ordinary people, are people who are driven not by their minds, but by their spinal cords. The notion of kind of animal
can you pause real quick?
drives,
Yes.
unconscious, instinctual.
I think these are, it's interesting to notice for those people who start understanding, because to most people, and well, for me, my whole life, they were invisible. I never even knew what a Jew was, except for like from the Bible, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I knew Jews in my life. I didn't even know they were Jews. I didn't know that they were like a type of, a class of human being, there's a type. I thought they were just, I thought the ones that I knew as a kid, I thought they were just kind of, not even to be mean, I thought they were like retarded.
Mm-hmm.
That's, as a child, that's what I thought, because they acted different and looked different. I thought they were just like weird. But looking back, I was like, oh, his name was Rosenberg. Oh, he wasn't retarded. He was Jewish. But the thing is, my point is that not all of them have a big hooked nose. Not all of them look like Adam King, kind of deserty or curly hair. Some of them have straight hair. Some of them have like but like the Lex Friedman, he doesn't, like that one right there. It's like, oh, that's just a white guy, right? But that's a particular type of the European phenotype of Jew. And there's different types. But once you start noticing, it's very interesting. You can start to see, oh, this is not an Anglo. This is not a Nordic. This is a Jewish European. You start to see it. You start to be able to, they become less invisible.
Okay. What's the super chat?
Doing your time in San Diego Cancer Center? What the heck?
I don't know.
Never
I don't
been there.
know. All right, moving on.
You're welcome. You're welcome for donating my time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
drives lurking beneath the surface of civilization. And so they started looking towards psychological science as a way of understanding the mechanisms by which the popular mind works, specifically with the goal of figuring out how to understand how to apply those mechanisms to strategies for social control.
Edward Bernays was fascinated by Lippmann's arguments and also saw a way to promote himself by using them. In the 1920s, he began to write a series of books which argued that he had developed the very techniques Lippmann was calling for. By stimulating people's inner desires and then sating them with consumer products, he was creating a new way to manage the irrational force of the masses.
So Edward Bernays used propaganda to brand himself as the godfather of propaganda.
Yeah, right. Isn't that amazing?
That's funny as hell.
Yeah, it's like if you're a
Oh my God.
hypnotist,
Go ahead.
and you hypnotize somebody into believing you're the best hypnotist in the world.
Yeah.
It's like, well, brilliant. Yeah, it's sort of it's really nice how it works that way.
Well, it's kind of, if you come up with that idea, like, don't you deserve the title on some level? I mean, that is kind of like king level propagandist, to use propaganda to convince people you're a king.
Yeah, right.
So,
but if you get the idea from somebody else and then you use the idea to make everybody think that you came up with the idea, don't hate the player, hate the game.
But did you just use the idea better than the other guy? So it's kind of like in cycling, when like Lance Armstrong got in trouble for doping, but like everyone was doping in cycling at that time, and it was just that Lance Armstrong like mastered the science of it, and he was obsessed with like figuring it out. So everyone was cheating, but Lance Armstrong cheated the best, and so like shouldn't he still get some credit for that?
Yeah, hard to say. Yeah, it's funny. But yeah, if you're the best gunslinger in the world, does that make you the grandfather? Did you invent guns, or did you just master the use of the gun? And who's the most important one in the whole story anyway? So yeah, he's sort of, maybe he is the grandfather of propaganda, even if he didn't invent it himself.
Even the movie that's kind of like being subversive towards the propaganda, the main character is still the propagandist that used propaganda to make us think he's the main character.
Nice.
I'm going to stop now.
The engineering of consent.
Democracy, to my father, was a wonderful concept, but I don't think he felt that all those publics out there had reliable judgment, and that they very easily might vote for the wrong man or want the wrong thing, so that they had to be guided from above. It's
Here we go.
enlightened despotism in a sense.
Enlightened
you appeal
despotism?
to their
What an
desires
incredible
and their
spin.
unrecognized longings, that sort of thing. That you can tap into their deepest desires or their deepest fears and use that to your own purposes.
And then, in 1928, a president came to power who agreed with Bernays. President Hoover was the first politician to articulate the idea that consumerism would become the central motor of American life. After his election, he told a group of advertisers and public relations men, "You have taken over the job of creating desire and have transformed people into constantly moving happiness machines. Machines which have become the key to economic progress." What was beginning to emerge in the 1920s was a new idea of how to run mass democracy. At its heart was the consuming self, which not only made the economy work, but was happy and docile, and so created a stable society.
Both Bernays and Littman's concept of managing the masses takes the idea of democracy and it turns it into a palliative. It turns it into giving people some kind of feel-good medication that will respond to an immediate pain or an immediate yearning, but will not alter the objective circumstances one iota. I mean, democracy really, the idea of democracy at its heart was about changing the relations of power that had governed the world for so long.
Hang on. I'm sorry. I have to say it. The nature of democracy was about changing the powers that had governed the world. Isn't that like saying introducing socialism? Because the only true form of democracy to socialists is socialism. You're changing the power dynamics. So isn't this
it's almost a different word that means the same thing.
I understand. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it really sort of is.
Okay. Thank you.
The thing is, it's just like depends on, like if it's an ocracy, right? A ruling class of the the demography. There's a demography within the group that makes the choices, that leads the place. So there's a class of people that make choices to rule it. We've extended it to where it's all people are part of that demography. So now and who are all those people? They are the society. So it's like a social rule, which is, so you could also say socialism.
So,
but
hang on. Democracy is the road to socialism.
Right. It's by the people for the people. But the people are retarded and they're brainwashable by propaganda. So it ends up being by the propagandists for the propagandists. And you just don't realize it. You think it's you making the choice, but it isn't. It's them. It's them putting that desire and that influence and that perspective into your mind. And then you go and choose based on the impulse that they've subconsciously planted there to the
So,
propaganda.
what do you think would happen if, like, so? Because I think that the radical revolutionary left is going to win in, like, 10 to 15 years or so. They're going to have their violent revolution, and then we're going to go through a long, slow descent into like a socialist and like communist society. I could be wrong, whatever, but that's what I think now. So your argument is that the radical revolutionary socialists that we follow are useful idiots of the higher class of being, for lack of a better term, I suppose. And so they don't even know that they're useful idiots. They think they're true believers, and they are in regards to like their ideology, but they don't understand that they're being puppet mastered by a higher class of people. So if I am right that the radical revolutionary socialists are going to get what they want, what happen? Like, what do the puppet masters do then? Do you think? Like, what happens next? You know what I'm saying?
The achievement of a one world government.
Which is what the socialists want too, because they say that you can't have socialism if it's just the United States. The United States is just the first domino.
Yeah. Yep. That's what they're
So it
after.
all goes to the same place, and it's just this is kind of like what I've been saying though. It's like it all goes to the same place, but there are different groups that want control of that one world government, and it's not. I think people get confused because they think that like all these groups are kind of like working together. And I guess they are to a certain extent, but really at the end of the day, what's going to happen is they're going to fight. And there is going to be like one winner ultimately.
And part of the plan, as far as I know, is that there is going to be a giant culling of the population too.
Yeah.
Like the doorway to get into that new world is a big fucking war.
Yeah.
That they eventually provide the solution to that. So that the ruling structures of the world all collide and destroy each other. And then this new benevolent ruler emerges and says, all right, now that we've got that out of our system and all these other ruling Goliaths that used to exist are all brought to their knees because they've destroyed each other. Now a new order will emerge in the hands of us. We can impose new restrictive laws on everybody that's universal and global. Everybody's adhering to this. Everybody uses the same currency. Everybody's part of a global alliance. And we all adhere to these international laws that are in the hands of the ruling elite. There's one economy, one government, one big beehive humanity where we're all essentially slaves to. And it turns out that the people who rule it are all, it's the Jews. At the end of the day.
No, it's not YouTube. It's definitely not the Jews. I push back. I decline. I disavow.
Just kidding. It's somebody else. It's the Chicoms. It's the Chinese. It's those darn Chinese.
Obviously, the Chinese are going to red down our asses at any moment. They're going to win. It'll be fine.
Yeah. No, it's those scary Osama bin Laden Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not.
And Bernays' concept of democracy was one of maintaining the relations of power, even if it meant that one needed to sort of stimulate the psychological lives of the public. And in fact, in his mind, that was what was necessary. That if you can keep stimulating the irrational self, then leadership can basically go on doing what it wants to do.
Bernays now became one of the central figures in a business elite that dominated American society and politics in the 1920s. He also became extremely rich and lived in a suite of rooms in one of New York's most expensive hotels, where he gave frequent parties.
Oh my goodness. He had a home in the corner suite of the Sherry Netherland Hotel. And here's this wonderful suite with all these windows looking out on Central Park and across at the plaza and on the square. And he would use this place to hold a soiree. The mayor would come. All the media leaders would come, the political leaders, the business leaders, the people in the arts. I mean, it was a who's who. People wanted to know Eddie Bernays because, he himself became a sort of a famous man, a sort of a magician who could make these things happen.
He knows everybody. He knows the mayor and he knows the senator, and he calls politicians on the telephone as if he did get literally a high or a bang out of doing what he did. And that's fine, but it can be a little hard on the people around you. especially when you make other people feel stupid. People who worked for him were stupid, and children were stupid, and if people did things in a way that he wouldn't have done them, they were stupid. It was a word that he used over and over and over, dope and stupid.
And the masses?
They were stupid.
I mean, I call them retards all the time. I don't see a problem with this.
But Bernays' power was about to be destroyed dramatically, and by a type of human irrationality he could do nothing to control.
Uh-oh.
At the end of October 1929, Bernays organized a huge national event to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the invention of the light bulb. President Hoover, the leaders of major corporations, and bankers like John D. Rockefeller were all summoned by Bernays to celebrate the power of American business. But even as they gathered, news came through that shares on the New York Stock Exchange were beginning to fall catastrophically.
Uh-oh.
Throughout the 1920s, speculators had borrowed billions of dollars. The banks had promoted the idea that this was a new era where market crashes were a thing of the past. But they were wrong. What was about to happen was the biggest stock market crash in history. Investors had panicked and begun to sell in a blind, relentless fury that no reassurance by bankers or politicians could halt. And on the 29th of October 1929, the market collapsed. The effect of the crash on the American economy was disastrous. Faced with recession and unemployment, millions of American workers stopped buying goods they didn't need. The consumer boom that Bernays had done so much to engineer disappeared, and he and the profession of public relations fell from favor. Bernays' brief moment of power seemed to be over. The effect of the Wall Street crash on Europe was also catastrophic. It intensified the growing economic and political crisis in the new democracies. In both Germany and Austria, there were violent street battles between the armed wings of different political parties. Against this backdrop, Freud, who was suffering from cancer of the jaw, retreated yet again to the Alps.
Wait.
He wrote a book.
He was suffering of cancer of the jaw. That's so funny. So, I mean, like, I basically think that, not to get like woo for a second, but like, I think that like, basically if we experience like any illness or injury or any of that, like that starts in our head. And then, you know, we basically make ourselves sick based on whatever we're putting into the world. So if Freud had cancer of the jaw, what does that say about what he did that caused him to have cancer of the jaw? There was something about what he was speaking or not speaking.
I hope it's not because you smoked a pipe.
Well, no, I mean, maybe, but like, isn't it kind of funny though, that like, you know, Freud, like some of the origin of like these ideas in the world coming from Freud, he's the origin of these subversive ideas. He gets cancer of the jaw. The ideas that he's articulating are, I mean, you could argue a cancer to the society, and he ends up getting cancer of the jaw. I'm just saying it's weird. That's all I'm saying. A weird twist of fate, perhaps. Okay, thanks.
Called Civilization and Its Discontents. It was a powerful attack on the idea that civilization was an expression of human progress. Instead, Freud argued, civilization had actually been constructed to control the dangerous animal forces inside human beings. What was implicit in Freud's argument was that the ideal of individual freedom, which was at the heart of democracy, was impossible. Human beings could never be allowed to truly express themselves because it was too dangerous. They must always be controlled and would thus always be discontent.
Man doesn't want to be civilized, and he is civilization brings discontent. but it's necessary to survive. Otherwise, he couldn't survive. So he must be discontent, because this would be the only way to keep him within limits.
But what did Freud think about the idea of the equality of man?
He didn't believe in it.
We had 32 parties, and Hitler said, before those parties don't vanish, there is no Germany. That's true. You can't have 32 parties. And so they felt this one person will put an end to this comedy.
Freud was not alone in his pessimism. Politicians like Adolf Hitler emerged from a growing despair in the 1920s about democracy. The Nazis were convinced that democracy was dangerous because it unleashed a selfish individualism, but didn't have the means to control it. Hitler's party,
Wait.
the National Socialists, stood in
A selfish individualism.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of sounds like the opposite of socialism to me. Well, actually, so like one of the characteristics of like white supremacy culture. Do you remember back in 2020 when they had this museum? They had this display in the African American History Museum in Washington D.C. called like characteristics of a white supremacy culture, and the first thing on the list was rugged individualism. They're saying selfish individualism, so it sounds pretty similar. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that was Americanism. Americanism is originally was the rugged individual. It was the exploring, pioneering frontiersman.
Yep. Do you know what another word for individualism?
But then it became the selfish individual. This is the century of the self.
What
does it say? What?
Why do they have a vested interest in painting individualism as selfish? Do you think? What's another word for that?
Why does who?
What's another they, whoever they is? What is another word for individualism, do you think?
Are you trying to make me say capitalism?
Yes. Bot said it. I didn't say it. Bot said it.
Do you know what Nazi stands for?
What? National Socialist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I
So
know.
He wasn't for democracy or capitalism.
I know. I'm just saying.
But he also wasn't a Marxist revolutionary.
Big tech. Why can't you say capitalism? We're gonna make a song about you saying capitalism next.
Elections, promising in their propaganda.
Tell you what,
they would
here,
abandon
I'll make you a deal.
because of the
Okay.
chaos
Hang
and
on.
unemployment.
Okay, we're entering negotiations. I'm ready.
If you want me to replace whiteness with capitalism, I'll do it. If you replaced socialist with Judaism.
I don't want to get kicked off YouTube though.
Offers on the table. Up to you.
Oh God. I can't. I have to disavow. I have to disavow for the moment. We will re-enter negotiations at a later date.
Okay.
It led to.
Hard one.
In March 1933, the National Socialists were elected to power in Germany, and they set out to create a society that would control human beings in a different way. One of their first acts was to take control of business. The planning of production would in future be done by the state. The free market was too unstable, as the crash in America had proved. Workers' leisure time was also planned by the state through a new organization called Strength Through Joy. One of its mottos was service, not self. But the Nazis did not see this as a return to an old form of autocratic control. It was a new alternative to democracy, in which the feelings and the desires of the masses would still be central, but they would be channeled in such a way as to bind the nation together. The chief exponent of this was Joseph Goebbels,
Hang on,
the
I
Minister
can't
of
hear you.
Propaganda.
What was that?
I said, what an incredible idea.
What's that?
Rather than suppressing and ignoring individual desires and impulses, we'll acknowledge them, but then channel them into a way that it binds us all together. That was the whole idea. So in democracy, in the Jewish Americas and abroad, they would go, oh, we will give in to our individual impulses and have the economy revolving around everyone having maximum individual happiness. And in Germany, they said, wait a minute, these free markets are too unstable. And also these low impulses that we have do exist. Let's channel them into a national identity. So it was socialism, but national with a national identity. So we'll make it to where we do honor the individual need for pleasure and joy and all of that, but we'll do it in a way where we enjoy things that bind us rather than atomize and individualize and separate us. That was the idea.
But is there a way to do that without, again, YouTube? Is there a way to do that without killing Jews? Couldn't they just have stopped? Like, couldn't they just have done that and then stopped?
Well, the thing is, they were fighting.
Because we don't want to kill
They
Jews.
weren't-
That's like the highest priority. We don't want to kill Jews. No, that's bad. That's anti-Semitic. So couldn't they have just stopped?
Who just stopped?
Like what the organizers of the society that was acknowledging individual needs and all that stuff, but like also channeling it into like within this more nationalistic approach. Could they have done that without all the things that some would consider to be anti-Semitic? You know what I'm saying?
Well, if you start noticing who the people are who are promoting the individual selfishness, it was Bernays and Freud and Lippmann and the Frankfurt School and everybody in Vienna. And you go, wait a minute, it's all these people and the communism in Russia and all that. It's like, it's a group of people who are promoting the opposite of what they wanted. And they said, these people got to go. They got to get out of here.
Let me ask a different question because like, okay, so America is a different place than Germany was back then. If we were to try to do something like this in America,
we're not gonna.
Well, no, I know. I understand.
The real
I
solution
understand
is
that.
just
I
forget
understand that.
it. Just like, hey,
Well,
we
no,
can't.
and I agree. And I'm just saying, like, as a thought experiment, could we achieve? Okay, let's not even say America. Let's say, let's say New Hampshire wants to secede from the Union. Okay, there's already like votes on this stuff. Maybe let's live in a fantasy land where someday New Hampshire secedes, and now there's this smaller, like more manageable society that's getting relatively hegemonous because if we seceded, like there was hegemony there because that's how it seceded in the first place. So could those goals of like, you know, this National Socialist identity, could that exist without like taking away the anti-Semitism? You know what I'm saying?
Probably not.
Okay.
Can you protect your homeland without ever calling your enemy your enemy?
But if it were to be like in America, wouldn't there be, I mean, if New Hampshire were, well, okay. I need to think through this argument a little bit more. I don't have it right now. I'm kind of flubbing it.
It's tough. It's tough. I mean, if there is a group of people who's assaulting everything you hold dear, how do you protect everything you hold dear without being against those people?
Okay. I just want to say I'm not against any people. All people are fine.
Me neither. I'm for them.
Except for retards. I'm not for them. They can leave, but everyone else is fine.
Retards don't have power anyway, so I don't have to bow to them.
Well, some would argue that retards do in fact have power, and that's part of the problem, but that's probably a different discussion for another time.
Es mag gut sein, Macht zu besitzen, die auf Gewehren ruht. Besser aber und beglückender ist es, das Herz eines Volkes zu gewinnen und es auch zu behalten.
Goebbels organized huge rallies whose function, he said, was to forge the mind of the nation into a unity of thinking, feeling, and desire. One of his inspirations, he told an American journalist, was the writings of Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays. In his work on crowd psychology, Freud described how the frightening irrationality inside human beings could emerge in such groups. The deep, what he called libidinal forces of desire, are given up to the leader, while the aggressive instincts are unleashed on those outside the group. Freud wrote this as a warning, but the Nazis were deliberately encouraging these forces because they believed they could master and control them.
And they did.
Well, what was that? Sorry. What did you
Well,
say?
he said the Nazis took that idea, which it's just an acknowledgement of reality, is that under the conscious level of human intellect, there's a subconscious,
Mhm.
these other forces, the libidinal force, the sexual urge, the which is the primal instinct, right?
Mhm.
And you can give each individual over to individual expressions of it, or they realized they could also harness it and give it up to the leader, and then collectively use that force in the world. And he said that the Nazis believed that they could do that, and all I said was, well, they did do that. That's exactly what they did.
Mhm.
It's wild.
Was saying that masses are bound by libidinal forces. They love each other and delegate their ideas and their feelings to the chap on top.
What are libidinal forces?
Amen?
What are libidinal forces?
Well, forces of love.
Not hate.
No, hate is delegated to the others outside. It's the mob.
I could see from afar, looking up Wilhelmstraße towards Unter den Linden, how those 100,000 of people, when they passed Hitler, they just became completely delirious. They began to shout these cries I will never get out of my ears. Heil, Sieg, Heil. They demented. And here I got confirmation how those irrational forces, uncontrollable forces in Germany, in the Germans, had erupted, had broken out, were running wild, were departing, marching on.
And in America too, democracy was under threat from the force of the angry mob. The effect of the stock market crash had been disastrous. There was growing violence as an angry population took out their frustration on the corporations who were seen to have caused this disaster. Then, in 1932, a new president was elected who was also going to use the power of the state to control the free market. But his aim was not to destroy democracy, but to strengthen.
Why has there never been a Jewish president?
Are you asking me that?
Yeah. Why has there never been a Jewish president?
Why would there be?
Well, why wouldn't there? But why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't there be? Wouldn't that be advantageous? If they're rigging everything, and obviously I disavow that idea, YouTube. I don't agree. This is a thought experiment. If they're rigging everything, then wouldn't they just get? I mean, like if you listen to some people, they would point out that 7 out of the 8 Ivy League colleges have Jewish presidents, and it used to be 6 out of 8 until they got rid of that one black woman at Harvard, and replaced her. And so it's not like they're. I mean, they It's not like they haven't done this with other institutions. And if they're rigging elections in this fantasy thought experiment, then why wouldn't they just rig it to put a Jew in the presidency?
Well, the presidency is only one branch of our tripartite system. And the other thing is, we almost had one with Bernie Sanders. And the other thing is,
but the system worked against him. They cheated.
But the other thing is, the way that this type of power works, if you understand a hidden hand philosophy, it's much better when the same people are in charge no matter who is the president. That's how they have it set up. Same people are in charge and pulling the strings regardless of who's in there. So they operate through persuasion and influence rather than through direct figurehead leadership primarily. And you can mention the Ivy League schools, but we're not talking, those aren't done by popular election. That's all just by money and influence.
But that's kind of like what I'm saying, though. It's
more like being a chair of a board rather than a.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying in terms of like the soft power of like, you know, like this kind of more hidden group, and like the most powerful people usually aren't the ones that you hear from and stuff like that. But again, I would just say like maybe not every president can be Jewish, because that would be just a little bit unbelievable just as a proportion of the population. But wouldn't every once in a while they do something like that? Like with and I think your example with Bernie Sanders, I mean, the DNC explicitly rigged it against Bernie Sanders both times he ran. So why would they do that? Why wouldn't they?
First of all, it would be
Bernie
exceedingly difficult. It'd be exceedingly difficult. It's really, really difficult in a place where the religion is mostly Christian.
But so Bernie had a really, but I would argue, sorry, but Bernie had a really good chance of winning if he had beaten Hillary, right? Like I think one could argue that. So why did they rig it against Bernie? Why didn't they just allow him to win?
You have to ask them.
I'm asking you to pause it though. Like I'm curious about like how you think about this. I'm not saying you know the answer for sure. I'm saying just
look,
like
if you're what I'm saying is if you're smart, you probably realize it's not actually an advantage. It's actually better if you don't ever have a Jewish president. There's always a giant group of people who hates the president. They have it set up so that half the country hates the current president at all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they never actually have half the country hating a Jew. You know what I mean? Like who's in charge of everything and they blame him for everything that's bad. They can always have basically a white and once in a while, one time a black puppet come in, and everybody's adoration or hatred is always on that person who they're about to exchange him out anyway in 4 more years. And so a slight removal is a really big advantage, especially in another nation, you know?
Okay.
So I don't know. It might be just literally just for that reason. But I don't think it's that they couldn't if they wanted to. It's just the question of why don't they? Maybe they're just not that fucking crazy to make it that explicit. They require secrecy. Like it's important for them to stay hidden. You know, the goal is not to be right up front all the time. Like they do have, you know, there are Jews in the news, but a lot of people don't even really know. You know, like people don't even realize Rachel Maddow is a Jewish lesbian. They don't know. They just see some woman talking. They don't know it. But once you become a public figure who's like on the, so they do have Jews here and there, and I mean you do have right next to Nancy Pelosi. Who do you have standing right next to her every single time?
Chuck Schumer.
Chuck Schumer. Right, so they're always right there. And with Trump, you get what? You get Ivanka's married to Jared Kushner, who's Jewish. All of his kids are married to Jews. And if you get in Biden's cabinet, look at cabinet, it's like 7 out of 10 of them are Jewish. It's like, all right, they're always just right there. The point isn't to be the face. It's not the most powerful place to be. They want to be in the most powerful place, which is the one pulling the strings of the person who's standing in front of the microphone.
Do you ever think there'll be a reality in which they're just like, where they just like kind of like full mask off because there's just nothing that we can do about it all, and they're like, yeah, you guys are pretty fucked. We control everything, and we're just gonna do it now, and you guys are just gonna have to go along with it.
Yeah, I think that's after the collapse I was talking about before. It literally is just going to be the world's run by just Israel or whatever. It's just going to be, and that's what Adam King wants. He's the age of the Messiah, is when a Jew comes and rules the world, and the Christians want it too. But they'll call him the Antichrist.
Yeah. Great.
10th
Oh, go.
And to do this, he was going to develop a new way of dealing with the masses.
I am prepared, under my constitutional duty, to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. But in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power.
It was the start of what would become known as the New Deal. Roosevelt assembled a group of young technocrats and planners in Washington. He told them that their job was to plan and run giant new industrial projects for the good of the nation. Roosevelt was convinced that the stock market crash had shown that laissez-faire capitalism could no longer run modern industrial economies. It had become the job of government. Big business was horrified.
Thank you
But the New
both,
Deal
Chris.
attracted the admiration of the Nazis, especially Joseph Goebbels.
Wir betrachten die wirtschaftliche Entwicklung in Amerika mit dem allergrößten positiven Interesse. Und wir sind dort der festen Überzeugung, dass Präsident Roosevelt und seine Berater auf dem richtigen Wege sind. Es handelt sich in der Tat um das größte wirtschaftliche und soziale Problem aller Zeiten. Die vielen Millionen Arbeitslosen, die ihre Plätze an den Maschinen und in den Kontoren verloren haben, wieder an ihre alten Arbeitsstellen zurückzuführen. Das kann nicht allein der privaten Initiative überlassen werden. Ausschlaggebend ist, dass die öffentliche Hand mit positiven Maßnahmen eingreift.
But although Roosevelt, like the Nazis, was trying to organize society in a different way, unlike the Nazis, he believed that human beings were rational and could be trusted to take an active part in government. Roosevelt believed it was possible to explain his policies to ordinary Americans and take into account their opinions. To do this, he was helped by the new ideas of an American social scientist called George Gallup.
Favorite reading of New Deal Washington, the survey of U.S. public opinion. From offices at Princeton, New Jersey, a famed statistician, Dr. George Gallup, tells Washington from week to week what the nation is thinking. And in New York, Fortune magazine's analyst, Elmo Roper, compiles for publication a continuous record of the nation's approval or disapproval of how the country is being run.
Gallup and Roper rejected Bernays' view that human beings were at the mercy of unconscious forces and so needed to be controlled. Their system of opinion polling was based on the idea that people could be trusted to know what they wanted. They argued that one could measure and predict the opinions and behavior of the public if one asked strictly factual questions and avoided manipulating their emotions.
Well, how about this one? Do you think Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal has been bad for the nation in general?
No, that question's loaded. It automatically suggests an answer. Well, how about this? Is your present feeling toward President Roosevelt one of general approval or general disapproval? That's better.
Prior to scientific polling, the view of many people was that you couldn't trust public opinion. It was irrational, that it was ill-informed, chaotic, unruly, and so forth. And
I had to take all these classes on polling when I was in college because I majored in public relations as an undergraduate. And so I had to do all these classes on polling, and they taught us how to write polling questions and stuff like that. And now it's just dawning on me that these are, and you were taught that this is like the statistically accurate way to do it. And there's only one way to do these things and like whatever. And now it's kind of dawning on me that those were rules that were created by people who were in the room at the time and that it's all basically bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, and really it's a technique for just gaining data in a way, but it's not a really good way. It's what you do with the data that matters. And they think that they can predict things based on polls, and there's a little bit of correlation. But the real powerful thing is, rather than seeing how people feel, let's just make them feel a certain way. That's what the guys are doing.
And if you control the polls, then Like, it doesn't matter whether the data is true or
Yep.
false. You can use the polls to make people feel a certain way because they
Right.
want to go along with whatever's the winning team or whatever.
Yep.
Like, you're not normal if you're not doing this. Well, who's to say the poll is even an accurate depiction of what's normal?
Survey says that most people think this, and the wrong people think this.
Oh,
There's a
fuck.
minority.
Wait, the Family Feud was like brainwashing us.
Mhm.
Like, survey said this is what most people think. It's just all bullshit. Holy shit.
So
show, though.
that opinion
That was
should
a
be
good show.
dismissed. But with scientific polling, I think it established very clearly that people are rational, that they do make good decisions, and this offers democracy a chance to be truly informed by the public, giving everybody a voice in the way the country is run. I know my father wouldn't necessarily say the voice of the public is the voice of God, but he did feel very much that the voice of the people is a rational voice and should be heard.
What Roosevelt was doing was forging a new connection between the masses and politicians. No longer were they irrational consumers who were managed by sating their desires. Instead, they were sensible citizens who could take part in the governing of the country. In 1936, Roosevelt stood for re-election. He promised further control over big business. To the corporations, it was the beginning of a dictatorship.
Roosevelt interferes with private enterprise and is running the country into debt for generations to come. The way to get recovery is to let business alone.
But Roosevelt was triumphantly re-elected.
It looks, my friends, like a real landslide this time. So please let me thank you again and tell you that I hope to see you all very soon and bid you an affectionate...
Were all of the elections always rigged, do you think? Like the presidential ones? Or is it just like, doesn't matter
Probably.
really?
Who knows? Who knows?
All right.
But Wilson, before him, and Roosevelt, they both had a right-hand man named Bernard Baruch, who was a Jewish economist. And you can see the direction it started going is he was the puller of many of those strings in that time. Like they just said, it's basically an economic dictatorship on the corporations and a move toward creating a huge amount of debt for the nation. That's what happened right here.
What year was this again? Roundabout?
The 40s.
Okay. I have a giant dictionary from the 40s. I started this policy like a couple years ago of like buying really old like print books because I think that they're all going to be gone someday and I want to have a collection of like really old print books. And so I bought like the oldest dictionary that I could find that was like the largest was a dictionary that's like this fucking thick from the 1940s. And I figured I wanted one that was like pre-civil rights movement. And I really wanted one from the 20s, but that was just like the 40s one was the best option on eBay at the time. But everyone should buy an old dictionary, honestly.
Yeah, sure. See what back then. How much we shifted. Really changes everything.
It's fascinating to go through it.
Good night.
Faced with this, business now decided to fight back, to regain power in America. At the heart of the battle would be Edward Bernays and the profession he had invented, public relations.
Following that election, business people start to get together and start to carry on discussions, primarily in private, and they start talking to each other about the need to sort of carry on ideological warfare against the New Deal and to sort of reassert the sort of connectedness between the idea of democracy on the one hand and the idea of privately owned business on the other. And so, under the umbrella of an organization which still exists, which is called the National Association of Manufacturers, and whose membership included all of the major corporations of the United States, a campaign is launched explicitly designed to create emotional attachments between the public and big business. It's Bernays' techniques being used on a grand scale. I mean, totally.
General Motors Parade of Progress.
traveling the high roads and byroads of America, bringing to millions of Americans in their own hometown the fascinating story behind modern industry, showing...
The campaign set out to show dramatically that it was business, not politicians, who had created modern America.
better mode of living for all of us.
Bernays was an advisor to General Motors, but he was no longer alone. The industry he had founded now flourished as hundreds of public relations advisors organized a vast campaign. They not only used advertisements and billboards, but managed to insinuate their message into the editorial pages of the newspapers. It became a bitter fight. In response to the campaign, the government made films that warned of the unscrupulous manipulation of the press by big business. And the central villain was the new figure of the public relations man.
They tried to achieve their ends by working entirely behind the scenes, corrupting and deceiving the public. The aims of such groups may be either good or bad, so far as the public interest is concerned, but their methods are a grave danger to democratic institutions.
The films also showed how the responsible citizen could monitor the press themselves. They could create a chart that analyzed the reporting for signs of hidden bias. But such earnest instruction was to be no match for the powerful imagination of Edward Bernays. He was about to help create a vision of the utopia that free market capitalism would build in America if it was unleashed.
Really?
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up.
In 1939,
See,
New York hosted the World's Fair.
So this is vilifying free market capitalism too. You know what I'm saying? Free market capitalism is a tool of the evil propagandists to make us all consumers. So this is vilifying it too.
It's the vision. But it really is. But it's not. It wasn't free market capitalists that made us this way. It was Jewish psychologists. That's the thing. It's like this whole narrative of us being in love with big businesses and they're providing us a utopia. That's a narrative. It was formed with an agenda.
Okay.
Just like communism. That's a narrative with an agenda. The true agenda is a radical revolution of destruction. There's a narrative that promises a utopian vision. And the dupes who get propagandized into the utopian vision, the true believer, doesn't realize they're working toward a radical violent revolution, which is really the aim. The aim is not actually a utopia. The aim is an agenda that somebody who invented that narrative secretly has.
Mm-hmm.
Edward Bernays was a central advisor. He insisted that the theme be the link between democracy and American business. At the heart of the fair was a giant white dome that Bernays named Democracity. And the central exhibit was a vast working model of America's future, constructed by the General Motors Corporation.
To my father, the World's Fair was an opportunity to keep the status quo, that is, capitalism in a democracy and capitalism, that marriage, right, linking, just like that. He did that by manipulating people and getting them to think that you couldn't have real democracy in anything but a capitalist society, which was capable of doing anything, of creating these wonderful highways, of making, moving pictures inside everybody's house, of telephones that didn't need cords, of sleek roadsters. I mean, it was consumerist, but at the same time, you inferred that in a funny way, democracy and capitalism went together.
The World's Fair was an extraordinary success and captured America's imagination. The vision it portrayed was of a new form of democracy, in which business responded to people's innermost desires in a way politicians could never do. But it was a form of democracy that depended on treating people not as active citizens, as Roosevelt did, but as passive consumers. Because this, Bernays believed, was the key to control in a mass democracy.
It's not that the people are in charge, but that the people's desires are in charge. The people are not in charge. The people exercise no decision-making power within this environment. So democracy is reduced from something which assumes an active citizenry to the idea of the public as passive consumers. Driven primarily by instinctual or unconscious desires, and that if you can in fact trigger those needs and desires, you can get
I've had that with yarn though, so okay.
But this struggle between the two views of human beings as to whether they were rational or irrational was about to be dramatically affected by events in Europe. Events that would also change the fortunes of the Freud family. In March 1938, the Nazis annexed Austria. It was called the Anschluss. Hitler arrived in Vienna to an extraordinary outpouring of mass adulation. But even as he drove through the city, behind the scenes, the Nazis were systematically whipping up and unleashing the hatred of the crowd against the enemies of the new Greater Germany.
The Anschluss was a kind of explosion of terrible hatred against the enemies, so-called enemies, or whatever they considered enemies, against the Jews totally, and also against a lot of very distant Austrians who had opposed the Nazis in Austria. They said it's legitimate, now you can do what you want, so they did it. Stealing, robbing, and killing, I can't say it otherwise. And human depravity, of course, is always very near to normal behavior. It can change very quickly.
As the violence and assassinations raged in Vienna, Freud decided he had to leave. His aim was to go to Britain, but he knew that Britain, like many countries, was refusing entry to most Jewish refugees. But help came from the leading psychoanalyst in Britain, Ernest Jones. He was in the same ice skating club as the Home Secretary, Sir Samuel Hoare, and Jones persuaded Hoare to issue Freud a British work permit. And in May 1938, Freud, his daughter Anna, and other members of his family set off for London. Freud arrived in London as Britain was preparing for war, and he settled with his daughter Anna in a house in Hampstead. But Freud's cancer was now far advanced, and in September 1939, just 3 weeks after the outbreak of war, he died. The Second World War would utterly transform the way governments saw democracy and the people they governed. Next week's program will show how the American government, as a result of the war, became convinced there were savage, dangerous forces hidden inside all human beings, forces that needed to be controlled. The terrible evidence from the death camps seemed to show what happened when these forces were unleashed. And politicians and planners in post-war America would come to believe that hidden under the surface of their own population were the same dangerous forces. And they would turn to the Freud family to help control this enemy within. And ever adaptable, Edward Bernays would work not just for the American government, but the CIA. And Sigmund Freud's daughter, Anna, would also become powerful in the United States because she believed that people could be taught to control the irrational forces within them. Out of this would come vast government programs to manage the inner psychological life of the masses.
All right. We made it.
BBC.
We made it. It took an hour. It took 3.5 hours for us to watch an hour-long movie. That's all right, though.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. I thought it went okay. We didn't fight or anything, so that's, progress.
Why would we fight?
We never fight. That would never happen. Especially when you're
peaceful. That's what I'm known as, big
Yeah,
peacemaker.
yeah. Especially when you're trying to convince me of something that I don't want to be convinced of, and then we never fight. All right. Well, do you have you sent me something else? What's that for? You sent me some other video.
That was just for if we would bring. I didn't find the time to.
All right.
Make it relevant. It wasn't a big deal.
Okay.
It's just like there's another podcast that's actually quite good. You can just check that out on your own. But this guy and his co-host lady, they go through some of the books that Bernays wrote.
Mm-hmm. Did everything just freeze for me? Oh, wait, hang on. I hear you.
Froze
hang on.
up for a second.
Okay. I was like, what's going on? Okay.
All right, chat. Who won? Me or Carlin?
It wasn't a competition. We weren't this wasn't a debate.
That's what you think. That's what you think.
You don't get to ask your chat. That's
you
not
didn't
fair.
know? You didn't know that I was persuading and changing your mind?
Well, I mean, of course we knew. We sussed that out from the very beginning with the help of Human Centipede, who said this is an elaborate plot on your part to change my mind.
Yeah, he spotted it.
Yeah, he knows.
There spotted it.
He knows.
Nice.
But so that's part 1. So we have 3 more parts left of this. So to be continued, I guess.
Maybe we'll do another one next week.
All right. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for hanging out with me for 3.5 hours to watch a subversive movie. I appreciate it. If you guys want to follow BigTech, you can find his link. I think I put it in the description below. Kick.com/BigTech, and you can go watch him continue in the Shadow Realm over on his channel if you want to.
Go make an account on Kick. If you're not already there, you can follow my channel. You'll get notifications when I go live. But also, if you follow me on Twitter or X, I'm at BigTech404.
BigTech.
Find me there. If you follow me there, I put announcements out too on X when I go live.
Awesome. And maybe in the course of watching the 4 parts, we'll get you out of the Shadow Realm.
Maybe.
Or
maybe I'll pull you into it.
Maybe you will. Who knows?
Shadow
All right.
Carlin.
Dark Carlin.
Yeah. Have we seen Dark Carlin yet?
Dark Carlin looks like this. That's Dark Carlin.
Yeah. After you go to AFPAC and meet the Groypers, you'll go.
Oh no! Oh no! I'm scared about that.
You should be.
I want to. I feel like I need a pep talk before that. What the fuck was I thinking?
I don't know, but I can't wait. I think it's going to be amazing.
It's a horrible idea.
Yeah. You have an interesting perspective on them after you go, hey, maybe it'll be great. Maybe you'll have a great time.
As soon as the announcement went out that I was coming to AFPAC, I got added to some Groyper group chat on Twitter. And now I have a group of Groypers that are like simping for me in this group chat. And they're actually very sweet and nice. And like anytime one of the Groypers starts to cause problems, they get called an asshole and get kicked out of the group chat.
Nice.
So they're doing their job. I appreciate it.
Perfect. All right. That's good. Yeah. You've been granted the pass by Nick. You've been anointed as approved by the leader, by the Führer. I'm
an exception to the e-girl rule. Go ahead. Sorry.
It'll be fun for you to even think about what we just learned, in that video about the importance of channeling the affection toward a leader and all of that. And think about the incels and their sexual energy, their libidinous energy being channeled toward Nick. And he's the cute cat boy leader. He looks so handsome today, Nick. They say in the super chats. It's just like it's cute. It's adorable. But Nick's doing it, right? That's Nick's doing the thing. He's doing the thing. So the AFPAC meeting, that's what it's about. He has his Fuentes rally and he has AFPAC. It's about getting them and channeling the incel libido toward their vision.
I think it's going to be fascinating to go through on it, or go to. I shouldn't say go through, but maybe that was the Freudian slip, as it were. But I am also slightly terrified. But I learned that, so the thing I was most terrified about was seeing Lauren Witzke, because I haven't talked to Lauren Witzke in a long ass time since, you know who she is, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So I was in a debate with Lauren Witzke in the very beginning of 2021 on Elijah Show, and it was like a week after she called for my husband to be deported on Twitter to 70,000 followers, and so I wasn't too happy about it. So I wasn't too happy about that. And so during the debate, I made a point to remind her that I, in fact, am married and she is still a spinster. And it broke her for 3 straight days afterwards. She was like posting shit about me all over the place. She was so bad. And I haven't really talked to Lauren Witzke since. And when I RSVP'd to AFPAC, I was like, you guys need to keep me the F away from Lauren Witzke, and I'm not messing around. But then I found out that apparently Lauren Witzke is pregnant with a Mexican baby.
Oh. Is she really? That's crazy.
Apparently,
is that public?
That's what Stu Peters said Stu Peters said it on Fresh and Fit, apparently.
He said Mexican baby?
Yes. I tweeted it this either today or yesterday.
I gotta watch that. I'm probably gonna react to that tomorrow, Stu on Fresh and Fit. I'll probably watch that.
Yeah. I don't like him either, but whatever. No. Anyway, thank you, Big Tech. I appreciate you.
You too.
Been in the shadow.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Carlin Heads. See you guys.